Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Laura Lopez. Laura Lopez was born on November 11, 2000, in Plauder, Argentina. Her older sisters, Melissa and Demoris, who were 18 at the time of her birth, love her very much. Tragically, their mother passed away when Laura was just 3 years old, and her 3 sisters were taken care of by their father. Although he initially tried to support the family, he later fell into alcoholism a few years after. Despite the challenges she faced, Laura was known for her sweet and loving personality. Her sister affectionately called her Cello, a nickname that everyone who knew her called. Years later, when their father lost his job, the family needed to find additional work. At 18, Laura started selling fried pastries during the day while attending high school in the evening. In her free time, she focused on caring for her nieces and nephews. At the beginning of her studies, she hoped to secure a good job to improve her family's financial situation and bring them stability. Unfortunately, an unexpected incident occurred that hindered her plans. On September 12, 2019, Laura and Demoris spent the entire day enjoying tea together. Demoris had just completed renovations on her house, and Laura playfully remarked that Demoris had never made tea quite like that before. Regardless, it was a lovely day. Later, Laura went to school, where her classmates noticed something unusual about her behavior. She decided to sit at the back of the class instead of her usual seat and left shortly after 20 minutes, when the lesson ended. When Laura returned home around 11:30 p.m., a friend greeted her. They chatted, had a few drinks, and took selfies for social media. They said their goodbyes at 3 a.m. Laura expressed that she was feeling tired and to get some sleep. The next day, Melissa sent a message to Laura asking if she had seen a doctor for her ear problems. When Laura didn't respond, Melissa started to feel anxious. Worried about Laura's whereabouts, Melissa reached out to Demoris for information, which only heightened her concern. After hours of searching, Melissa and Demoris went to the police station for help. However, they were told they would have to wait 48 hours since Laura was last seen before they could file a missing person report. The officers thought Laura might have had a boyfriend, since it is common for teenagers to encounter situations like this. On Saturday the 14th, the police received a report, and they initiated a search, but unfortunately, it was too late. On Sunday the 15th, 2 fishermen working in the El River's breakwater area, just 15 kilometers from Laura's home, noticed something unusual. They remained calm until they discovered a young girl's body floating in the water, with limbs and a skull. They quickly contacted the authorities to report their find. When the officers arrived, they saw that the attack had been extremely violent, and it was clear that the attacker was skilled with knives. The detectives were actively looking for clues in the crime scene. They found a fabric bag, leggings, and underwear in the river, but they were completely destroyed. During their investigation, they also discovered 2 rings and, after searching the riverbed, found a knife stained with blood. The officers contacted Laura's family, and when Demoris arrived at the location, she quickly identified the clothing as Laura's belongings. Fishermen had found Laura's limbs and skull in shallow waters downstream from the initial discovery, which was then handed over to the forensic team for examination. Dr. Carlos Gordillo conducted the autopsy and determined that the death was caused by a severe blow to the head, which led to internal bleeding and increased pressure in the brain. A blow to the back of the head left her unconscious. Laura suffered between 2 and 4 hours of intense pain. Additionally, bruises were found on her arms, indicating that she had been beaten and had fought against her attacker. And the presence of intimate injuries on her body was a clear indication of sexual assault. Dr. Carlos Gordillo also mentioned that there were cuts on her neck, arms, and legs, suggesting that the attacker might have used kitchen knives. After 3 a.m. on Friday, they analyzed Laura's cell phone. Her last contact was with a 28-year-old mechanic named Alfredo Emilio Escobar. He and Laura had been high school classmates, and he enjoyed hunting and fishing, which meant he was skilled with a knife. His house was 2.5 kilometers, 20 blocks, from Laura's home, making it easy for him to visit. The cell tower signals were strong, and on September 13th, Alfredo contacted Laura 4 times. At that time, the cell towers showed they were both at home. Soon after, both phones were active near Laura's house. Laura's phone traveled to the city center and arrived at Alfredo's residence by 5 a.m. Laura's WhatsApp story featured an alien emoji, and her phone was still being tracked. Alfredo was found at his home at 5:52 a.m. After this time, Laura's phone stopped working, and there was no further communication from her. Records show that Alfredo didn't use his cell phone again until 11:05 p.m. the following day. Alfredo returned home at 12:05 p.m. on September 15th, caught by 13 cameras, including city and private surveillance. Investigations on local stores revealed recordings from the early morning of September 13th, showing their physical characteristics resemble Laura and Alfredo. Laura's then mobile phone was moving, and Alfredo was undoubtedly the only suspect in this case. During the investigation, one of the agents recognized Alfredo, recalling a meeting with him a year ago on Highway 22 while traveling to meet family in the towns of Nguyen and Plauder. At that time, a young man had crashed into a patrol car while driving over 80 kilometers per hour. He refused arrest, leading to a lawsuit. Alfredo was about to go to court for that incident, but now he faces more serious charges. At 8:30 a.m. on September 17th, a police patrol was stationed about 30 meters from Alfredo's residence. While on duty, they noticed a young man resembling he driving away from a Fiat Ducato minibus they had been watching. The police identified him by his face shape, facial features, and hairstyle. He entered a house and later left with 2 adults approximately 60 years old. The 3 of them got into a vehicle and headed towards Highway 22 without drawing attention. The police pursued the vehicle until it stopped in a remote area, around 30 meters from a bridge connecting Nguyen and Cello. The elderly man Alfredo got out of the vehicle at the same time, and the police asked for their identification. He was with his father and another man, while his mother stayed in the car. It was clear they were trying to leave the city. Alfredo agreed to the identification process but appeared nervous. Soon after, he was taken to the police station and his car was impounded. He underwent a medical examination, which revealed swollen areas on his right knuckles, indicating he had used them to punch. He also had cuts and bruises on the palm of his right hand. Laura's death happened the same day these were found. As a result, Alfredo was charged with raping and murdering Laura. Despite a request to remain silent, he was detained for 6 months over concerns he might escape or obstruct the investigation. On September 1st, a search warrant was executed at the Estrada Street residence where the Alfredo family lived. The property was large, with a construction site and 2 buildings at the back. In Alfredo's sleeping area, officers found fingerprints on the walls. Using luminol to test them revealed blood stains. A blood-stained cloth was also found during the search. The situation escalated when officers went to the building behind the residence and found blood spots on the crumpled vegetation. Blood was also detected on the gates, the right handle of a cart, and at one end of an infrared emitting device. This location was where the fatal blow that killed Laura occurred. The search team collected blood samples for comparison and found that both Laura's and Alfredo's blood were present. The fluid found on Laura's body was examined through DNA analysis. Alfredo's lawyer said the rape charges should not have been brought before the test results were available. However, the results were released shortly. The Ministry of Health Central Laboratory analyzed the samples collected during the investigation. The genetic profiles of both Laura and Alfredo were compared. At the time of his arrest, Alfredo was wearing sneakers, and a knife was found at the bottom of the river. Both were tested. DNA matching Laura's was found on both items. Her genital area was examined using 3 swabs, and Alfredo's DNA matched one of them. This evidence allowed investigators to confirm that he had sexually assaulted Laura. She was killed, dismembered, and her body was disposed of. Law enforcement officials confirmed this during a press conference on September 21st. The prosecutor Juan Austin Garcia believed Alfredo Emilio Escobar was guilty of the crime. He accused Alfredo of killing Laura to cover up the rape and said that if found guilty, Alfredo could be prosecuted and face life in prison. Despite this, more evidence was still needed. DNA analysis technology played an important role in discovering that Alfredo was the suspect. Although he did not plead guilty, the court ordered the seizure of his mobile phone and required him to provide the access code. Despite having Laura as one of his contacts, it was discovered that he had deleted her from the conversation the night she disappeared. He erased Laura's call history, but their social security numbers are still not deleted. Media interviews revealed Alfredo's actions on September 11th, 12th, and 13th. During the investigation, he visited social media platforms to look at photos shared by Laura. Although Alfredo claimed to be innocent, the evidence suggested he was responsible for the murder. Finally, conclusions have been drawn about the incident that took place on the night of the crime. On September 12, 2019, Laura left school around 8 p.m. After spending time with a friend, she mentioned feeling tired and intended to go to sleep. Despite this, Alfredo contacted her at 3:40 a.m. and they began a conversation. Although they were not friends, she agreed to meet him, and then she went to his house. The incident inside the house are unclear, but research shows that Laura avoided any personal contact with Alfredo. In a fit of anger, he sexually assaulted her. Because he was afraid she would denounce him to the authorities, he murdered her. Alfredo led Laura to the backyard, hitting her on the head twice. At that point, she was still alive, but he cruelly hid her body for several hours to avoid getting caught. He also turned off his phone. Laura's body remained in the shed for almost a day, and she died from her injuries. Alfredo used a sharp knife from his kitchen to dismember her body. He then packed the body her parts into his Fiat Ducato minibus and drove 15 kilometers to the area near the breakwaters and left her body there. Afterward, he returned and turned on his phone. Feel relieved that everything has been settled. This case attracted the attention of the whole city. Alfredo's 23-year-old sister made the most headlines when she posted a message on her personal page mentioning both her brother and the victim, Laura. The post received mixed reactions. Some people sympathized with her, while others accused her of being complicit. The younger sister Alfredo's asked Cello and her team to remain vigilant, as her family is involved. Melissa later contacted Alfredo's sister to thank her for the message and asked for clarification. The criminal case was immediately initiated by the prosecution. The initial court hearings were held at the Provincial Legislative Assembly. According to the prosecutor of Neuquén, Alfredo was entirely responsible for his actions, and Laura's death was attributed to gender-based violence, in addition to other charges such as rape. In the same hearing, the experts who were involved in analyzing the clothing found in the case, the river, along with the remains and evidence discovered at Alfredo's house, provided their testimony. Florencia, Laura's closest friend, was an unexpected witness. She explained that Alfredo had been messaging Laura for months, inviting her to meet for drinks and socializing. However, they had never met before. Florencia had known Alfredo for 5 years and was aware of his bad reputation. His house frequently hosted parties filled with alcohol and drugs, and intimate acts shared publicly by couples. Florencia had repeatedly advised Laura not to get involved with he, but she consistently ignored. The defense asked why Florencia had not suggested Laura blocking Alfredo's number. Florencia responded that Laura had made that decision and she did not want to interfere in Laura's life. While Florencia was on the stand, a video from security cameras from the day Laura disappeared was shown. In the footage from around 4 a.m., two people can be seen on opposite sides of the screen, heading towards the city center. Florencia admits that it was Laura, stating that her sneakers, jacket, and manner of walking were unmistakable. She also recognized Alfredo. The testimony of Alfredo's friend revealed his impulsiveness when the judge accused him of infidelity. His behavior was characterized by substance abuse and womanizing tendencies. Alfredo's ex-partner, also present in court, stated that their relationship ended badly years ago. She reported him to the authorities because she believed he had stolen from her house and taken money. When she met him to ask for the money back, he chased after the friend who accompanied her. After reviewing the testimonies, Alfredo tried to defend himself. He claimed that his friend, who sold him illegal drugs, was the real culprit. He said that he had been unconscious during the incident that night. He told the local media that he did not commit murder. He explained that he was intoxicated that night, and his friend was also under the influence of drugs at his residence with Laura. When he heard a scream from one of the rooms, Alfredo went to check it out. Seeing blood, he cleaned it up and helped his friend hide the body. In the end, the truth is what truly matters. Despite the lack of evidence, the statement was not confirmed. Alfredo was the only suspect. In his speech, the prosecutor stated that Alfredo took advantage of betraying Laura's trust due to his familiarity with her. He was responsible for the cruelty of his actions and the gruesome method of disposing of the remains. Alfredo Emilio Alfredo was convicted of the rape and murder of 18-year-old Laura Lopez after a jury deliberated for just 40 minutes. This charge is made more serious because it involved an attempt to conceal the attack. The issue of gender violence played a role in the case, leading to him receiving a life sentence without the possibility of release. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Chris Watts. The two met in 2012 and were both from North Carolina, with Shanann from Aberdeen and Chris from Spring Lake. They got married on November 3, 2012. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding due to their strained relationship with Shanann. Cindy later explained that she didn't get along with Shanann and felt she treated her son poorly. After a year of marriage, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This move marked a new beginning for the couple as they started their life together in their new home. Shanann's lifelong dream of becoming a mother finally came true on December 17, 2013, with the birth of her daughter, Bella. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, she welcomed her second daughter, Celeste. Those who knew Shanann described her as a kind and compassionate person who radiated love and positivity. She always strived to create the best life for herself and her family. As a mother, Shanann loved her two daughters, Bella and Celeste, more than anything in the world. Shanann was devoted to providing her children with the care and support they needed to thrive. Bella, the older of the two sisters, was a compassionate and caring child who naturally took on a protector role with her younger sister Celeste. From a young age, Bella showed a strong desire to look out for Celeste's well-being. Celeste, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone around her. Shanann was active on social media, using it to share videos that showcased her personality in daily life. Her friends and family enjoyed these videos, which often featured her husband Chris and their daughters. In her posts, Shanann frequently expressed her deep love and gratitude for Chris. While Shannon's loved ones admire their happy marriage, they also noticed that Chris tends to be reserved and not easily approachable. However, because Shannon clearly loves him, they respect his presence in Shannon's life. In June 2015, Shannon and Chris Watts faced severe financial difficulties and decided to file for bankruptcy. The couple struggled with a large mortgage, car payments, loans, and medical bills, in addition to a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, while Shannon was employed at a hospital call center. A year later, in 2016, Shannon began a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company called Lopez, where she sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was delivered through a patch. Her colleagues say Shannon is passionate about her work, with one colleague describing her as having a charisma that makes everyone feel welcome and supported. Although Shannon was happy with her life with Chris and their 2 daughters, she had always dreamed of having a 3rd child, a baby boy, to complete their family. Her wish was granted in spring 2018, when she discovered she was pregnant for the 3rd time. Elated by the news, Shannon planned a surprise for Chris. She waited for him to return home on May 28. Chris walked into the room, not knowing the surprise that awaited him. When Shannon revealed that she was pregnant with a baby boy. After hearing the news, both Chris and Shannon were overwhelmed with joy. They decided to name their unborn child Nico. During the summer of 2018, while pregnant with Nico, Shannon visits her family in North Carolina. Chris stays behind in Colorado for work. While in North Carolina, Shannon takes her daughters to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. During the visit, Cindy offers Celeste a snack. Despite knowing that Celeste has a severe nut allergy, Cindy gives Celeste a snack containing peanuts. This incident upsets Shannon, who feels that Cindy has put Celeste's life in danger. Shannon was upset and sent a text message to Chris expressing her frustration. She told him he should call his dad and tell him how he felt about his mom putting their daughter's safety at risk that day. Shannon believed Chris's mom was trying to upset her by taking risks with their child's life. While Shannon was visiting family in North Carolina, she noticed a change in Chris's communication style. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, which left her confused. When she asked him about it, Chris said he was busier at work due to new employees and that everything was fine. Despite his reassurance, Chris's sudden lack of communication concerned Shannon. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to join Shannon and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, for the week. The girls were excited to see their dad, and as soon as Chris stepped off the plane, they ran to him, eager for hugs. Chris picked them up and held them tightly. Chris's behavior toward Shannon was clearly different. He didn't greet her with a kiss, just a nod of acknowledgement. Shannon felt hurt and couldn't understand why Chris would act this way. She opened up to a friend via text message, expressing her concern that Chris had changed. Shannon's texts were filled with sadness and confusion. She told her friend that Chris was ignoring her, and they were barely communicating, even when they were in the same room. Instead of talking face-to-face, they were exchanging messages on their phones. Shannon even sent a picture to her friend, showing her and Chris sitting on separate couches, facing away from each other. In her messages, Shannon revealed her suspicions that Chris might be having an affair. Shannon confided in her friend that Chris had told her he no longer believed they were compatible, which left her heartbroken. Desperate to save their family, she proposed that they seek couples counseling to work through their issues. She was willing to make concessions and put in the effort to repair their relationship. However, Chris refused to consider counseling. Shannon soon realized that Chris was not willing to meet her halfway or make any compromises. Despite her efforts to save their relationship, Shannon came to understand that Chris was not interested in finding common ground or working through their problems together. After returning to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shanann's return was short-lived, as she soon left for a business trip to Arizona. While in Arizona, Shanann's friends noticed a change in her behavior. She seemed anxious and upset, rather than her usual happy self. One evening, Shanann opened up to her friends in their hotel room, sharing her concerns. She told them that Chris had expressed doubts about their relationship and refused to attend couples therapy. On August 11th, while Shanann was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification about a restaurant charge on the credit card account she shared with Chris, which raised her suspicions. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Chris might be seeing someone else. Around 1:48 a.m., Shanann returned home from her business trip. Shanann's close friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Footage from their doorbell camera confirmed that Shanann had indeed entered her house on August 13th. However, as the day progressed, Shanann failed to send her usual good morning messages, alarming her friends. A missed OB/GYN appointment scheduled for 9:30 a.m. did little to quell their concerns. However, when Shanann missed another engagement, a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, Nicole's concerns escalated, realizing something was seriously wrong as Shanann was now uncharacteristically incommunicado for the entire day. Nicole had a nagging feeling that something was wrong and decided to drive to Shanann's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shanann's truck was parked in a garage, which was very unusual. Nicole went to Shanann's house and knocked on the front door, hoping Shanann would answer and explain that she was just tired from her flight the day before. But Shanann didn't respond. Nicole contacted Shanann's husband, Chris, to see if he knew where she was. Chris told her not to worry, thinking that Shanann might have taken their daughter to visit a friend. However, this explanation did not make sense. Shanann didn't have any plans to meet up with her friends, and they were starting to get concerned. They told Chris that they were going to report Shanann and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, missing to the police. Chris didn't want to involve the police, but Nicole was worried about her friend and decided to call 911 to report them missing. When the police arrived at Shanann and Chris's house, an officer from the Frederick Police Department spoke with Nicole. The officer's body cam footage showed that Nicole was clearly distraught about her missing friend. As Nicole was explaining everything she knew about Shanann and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. However, unlike Nicole, he didn't seem particularly worried about their disappearance. During the search of the house, the officer found Shanann's purse, which was surprising since she and her daughters were missing. Inside the purse, the officer discovered medication for Shanann and her two daughters, which added to the concern. The discovery of the purse made Nicole even more anxious, but Chris remained calm. The officer also found Shanann's wedding ring, left on the bedside table, which seemed unusual given the circumstances. The officer and Chris then went to a neighbor's house to review footage from their security camera. The camera's angle captured part of the driveway and garage of Shanann and Chris's house, which might provide some clues. Chris can be seen on footage opening the garage door and leaving his home at 5:28 a.m. While reviewing the footage, Chris's behavior changed dramatically, appearing nervous and agitated. His neighbor even commented on Chris's unusual behavior, expressing doubts to the officer about Chris's actions. Chris's reluctance to join the search for his missing wife, Shanann, and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, raised concerns with Shanann's friends. They found it incomprehensible that Chris was not worried about his family's disappearance. As the investigation continued, officers went door to door in the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shanann or anything out of the ordinary. The search for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste intensified the next day, with the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joining the effort. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to aid in the search, both on the property and inside the house. As officers searched the home, one handler observed that the house had a strong smell of cleaning solutions and appeared unusually clean. This sparked suspicion, prompting the officers to take a closer look. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone may have attempted to conceal evidence or erase potential clues. Meanwhile, Chris gave an interview to a news station outside his home. He insisted that he and Shannon had not argued before she went missing and expressed his wish for his family to return home safely. Chris expressed his longing to be reunited with his family, stating that his house felt incomplete without them. However, his behavior during the interview raised suspicions. Despite his emotional words, Chris appeared detached and unemotional, which puzzled those who knew him. Shannon's friends who watched the interview felt his behavior was inconsistent with his pleas for his family to return, and that only added to their concerns. On August 14, Agent Coder interviewed Chris again. During the conversation, Chris suggested that Shannon may have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax. Meanwhile, the police department had received multiple reports of possible sightings of Shannon and her two daughters. Chris was shown various photographs, but he was unable to identify any of the individuals as his missing wife and daughters. Agent Coder also asked Chris about his marriage to Shannon. Chris claimed that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon and, to his knowledge, she had never cheated on him either. During an interview with Agent Coder, Chris exhibited suspicious behavior, frequently touching his neck with his hands. This caught Agent Coder's attention. The lack of updates from the authorities only intensified the family's desperation. After a 3-hour interrogation, Chris was released from the police department, but he was asked to return the following day, August 15, for a polygraph test, to which he agreed. On August 15, Chris picked up his father from the airport and then drove to the Frederick Police Department, where he was scheduled to take a polygraph test. The test was administered by Tammy Lee, a polygraph expert from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. During the test, Chris denied any involvement in his wife Shannon's disappearance and claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. However, his test results showed a score of -8, which was significantly lower than the -4 score needed to pass. This outcome led detectives to believe that Chris was responsible for the deaths of his wife and daughters. Tammy Lee, the polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed test results. Chris admitted to causing Shannon emotional pain, but denied physically harming her. He also confessed to having an affair with a coworker and expressed regret for his infidelity. However, he continued to deny any involvement in his family's disappearance. Later in the interview, Chris asked to speak to his father, Ronnie. The officers hesitated, worried that Ronnie's presence might cause Chris to ask for a lawyer. However, they let Ronnie into the interrogation room, hoping that Ronnie's presence might encourage Chris to confess. When Ronnie arrived, Chris told his father that he had killed Shannon, claiming that he did so because Shannon had harmed their daughters, Bella and Celeste. The detectives did not believe for a moment that Shannon had hurt her daughters. Chris eventually confessed to burying Shannon in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of the bodies of their daughters in oil tanks. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At his sentencing hearing, the judge stated that Chris's crimes were the most inhumane and brutal he had ever seen. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett is an 8-year-old girl who has just completed elementary school. She lives with her single mother, Elaine, who has worked hard to provide her daughter with a comfortable life. Elaine always tries to give Jennifer a happy childhood, full of love and care. Thanks to that, Jennifer has become a cheerful, active girl who loves to explore and learn. However, Jennifer still has a common fear in children, which is the fear of the dark. Therefore, she often sleeps in the same room as her mother. Elaine understands this fear and is always by her daughter's side. On the night of August 9, 2009, mother and daughter slept in the same room again. But Jennifer did not sleep well, constantly turning and lightly kicking her mother, making it difficult for Elaine to sleep. Elaine woke up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested Jennifer sleep in her own room so she could rest before the new workday. But Jennifer replied convincingly, "Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight because I love you," and she went to her own room to sleep for the rest of the night. Elaine regretted the decision for a long time, but at the time, she couldn't have known what would happen next. The next morning, Elaine went to wake Jennifer but found her missing. She found the window facing the parking lot wide open. Elaine quickly called 911. When the police arrived, she said she hadn't heard any noise or screaming after Jennifer went back to her room to sleep alone. Their apartment was on the first floor, and the window in Jennifer's room looked out onto the parking lot, causing Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment wasn't the ideal place for her and her little girl to live, but it was the best they could afford at the time. However, Elaine's parents decided to help her and her daughter find a new place to live. They bought a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother planned to move there in a few months, and they were there the day before Jennifer went missing. After her daughter went missing, Elaine was extremely sad and remorseful. She said that Jennifer was all she had and prayed that she could return. The police worked tirelessly to find Jennifer. Fortunately, Elaine did not have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in the fields and accidentally discovered a little girl. When they arrived at the scene, the police found 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of a field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was serious, with a cut on her throat from ear to ear, causing her to lose a lot of blood and turn pale. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors tried to save her life. Due to the injury to her neck, Jennifer was unable to speak. After surgery, Jennifer's condition stabilized, the bleeding stopped, and her breathing was steady. However, when Jennifer woke up from surgery, her mental state changed dramatically. She began to fear all men, including male doctors, making it difficult for her to recover. During this time, Jennifer was constantly panicking and even reacted defensively when male doctors tried to approach her. Elaine tried to explain to her daughter that everyone around her wanted to help and care for her. However, Jennifer did not trust anyone. Her behavior was understandable when she finally revealed what happened to her that night. The challenge was to gently get the information out of her. Now, considering she was only 8 years old, this was really difficult. Jennifer was too scared to speak directly to the investigators, so the detectives gave her a notebook and pen to write down her answers to their questions. Because she was afraid of men, Jennifer wrote a letter to her mother, who then forwarded it to the police. Although she was only 8 years old, Jennifer's written responses were surprisingly detailed and accurate. Jennifer explained that she went into her room, turned on the lights, and began reading a book to help her fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep but was then awakened by a stranger who carried her out of the house. The stranger ran down the sidewalk with Jennifer in his arms. As soon as Jennifer realized what was happening, she tried to scream, but the stranger covered her nose and mouth. The stranger then put Jennifer in his car and identified himself as an undercover police officer. However, Jennifer's instincts told her that something was wrong. She looked around and saw her mother's car in the parking lot, which made her even more confused about where they were going and why. Jennifer had been taught that the police were trustworthy, but she had also been warned not to trust strangers. Her fear and recent experiences with strangers made her suspicious of the stranger's words, and she sensed that something was wrong. Jennifer asked the stranger to drop her off at her grandparents' house. But he refused, saying that they were not home. However, she noticed that her grandparents' car was in the driveway, which suggested that he was lying. The man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her house. He told her to watch the moon closely and said that her mother would come when the moon changed color. Jennifer waited anxiously for her mother to pick her up, but her mother never showed up. She suspected that the man was preparing for his true intentions. After 5 minutes, the stranger announced that her mother would not be coming and that they needed to drive further. They stopped at a dead-end street, where Jennifer asked the stranger to prove that he was a real police officer. She questioned him, asking where his gun and badge were. When he said that his gun was in the back seat, Jennifer turned around to look for it. That was when the stranger removed her underwear. Jennifer then lost consciousness, so she was not sure how long she was under his control. Jennifer slowly regained consciousness as she was dragged through a field, her ankles constantly rubbing against the road. The pain from the branches and rocks stabbed into her back, but she pretended to be dead and kept quiet, realizing that this was her chance to survive. Her attacker eventually let go of her legs and left her in the field. Jennifer heard him walk away, followed by the sound of his car door slamming and the sound of the engine driving away. When she regained consciousness, Jennifer found that she could not scream, and she was not sure why. She mustered enough strength to bring her right hand to her neck, where she discovered an open wound. Her hand was covered in blood. The exact time she had been missing is unknown, but it is believed that she had been lying in the field for between 12 and 14 hours. As the sun began to set, Jennifer saw the lights of passing cars nearby and heard the sounds of children. A dog approached her several times, seemingly trying to get its owner's attention, but no one came. Throughout her suffering, Jennifer was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Each time she woke up, she could not believe that she was not dead. Jennifer had accepted her fate, thinking that she would not survive. But everything changed when she heard the sounds of children nearby. Suddenly, something hit her leg. When Jennifer later regained consciousness, she found herself being reassured by a police officer who repeatedly told her, "You've been found, you'll be okay. Just stay with me." The officer's words provided comfort to Jennifer as she was loaded into the Lifeline helicopter. The aftermath was a challenging experience for 8-year-old Jennifer, who struggled to communicate due to her inability to speak. She had to write her answers down on paper to convey her story. Additionally, her fear of men made the situation even more complicated. To make her feel more comfortable, her mother stepped in to ask questions on behalf of the police, relaying Jennifer's answers to the officers waiting behind the door. What's remarkable about Jennifer's story is that, despite her ordeal, she was able to remember the stranger's name. She remembered the man telling her his name was Dennis and describing him as fat, with a possible scar on his face. Police also sought the assistance of forensic pathologist Lois Gibson. Although they could only communicate with Jennifer through gestures and notes, they were able to create an extremely detailed composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch was released in the hope of getting information from the public about the identity of the man in the drawing. Meanwhile, police continued to investigate the scene and found Jennifer's clothes about half a mile away, along with a man's clothes. Despite hopes of finding DNA on the clothes to catch the culprit, no matches were found. Jennifer gradually recovered from her injuries. Despite her young age, she showed incredible resilience. During her recovery, there was a moment when she was upset about a chocolate bar that she couldn't eat. She screamed in frustration and let out a weak sound. The doctors were amazed to see that her vocal cords, which had been nearly severed and were not expected to heal, began to miraculously recover. After a while, Jennifer was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. She returned home and went back to school, eventually finishing high school and college. After that, Jennifer decided to become a children's librarian. Even so, she never forgot what happened that night. Every day, she felt like she was chasing a criminal and that the criminal could be anyone. Jennifer thought that it could be her new neighbor, or a stranger at the post office or the grocery store. She always felt like the person was watching her and would come back to kill her. Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan. For the first time in years, she was able to trust a man. They fell in love and Jennifer felt a little more secure. However, around that time, the clues to her attacker began to fade. The chances of finding him were slim. Her case was passed from investigator to investigator. But still no progress was made. 18 years after that terrible night, Jennifer received a phone call. It was a notice that Detective Tim Cromie was taking over her case and wanted to meet with her. Tim Cromie pledged to do everything he could to catch the criminal. Jennifer trusted him, and Tim Cromie told her that he would do everything in his power until the end of his career to get the answers she needed about this case. To help with the case, Tim decided to involve FBI agent Richard Renison in the investigation. Richard had worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered a large amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and shortly after she was found. Jennifer's underwear, shirt, and other items belonging to the perpetrator were particularly important, so they sent a sample of the DNA found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although the detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in the 19 years since the crime, they understood that the age of the case could cause the evidence to not be prioritized in the lab. Despite the years, their work finally paid off. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford, the man Jennifer had described years earlier. The 8-year-old Jennifer had described the man with astonishing accuracy, even though she was on pain medication at the time and unable to speak. Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas. His DNA was entered into the national database after an attack on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. Dennis was released on parole on February 4, 2000. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for drunk driving less than half a mile from his home. He later remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Investigators Tim Cromie and Richard Renison found a lot of information about Dennis. In 1987, Dennis had been arrested in Dickinson, 3 years before the attack on Jennifer. The investigators discovered that he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer's residence, and Jennifer was able to confirm his identity as the kidnapper. They then requested a photo of Dennis's driver's license from when he was 19. Upon seeing the photo, they were shocked because the man looked very similar to the sketch created based on Jennifer's description at age 8. On October 19, 2009, Dennis Cyril Bradford was arrested. However, he claimed that he did not remember why he stopped near Jennifer's residence or why he had mistreated her. Dennis also revealed a detail that investigators did not know. After the attack, he felt so overwhelmed by guilt that he attempted suicide with a handgun. Despite reaching for the gun, Dennis was ultimately unable to pull the trigger and decided to seek psychiatric help. During his stay at the psychiatric hospital, Dennis accidentally visited the hospital where Jennifer was still a patient, and he was very close to her at the time. Immediately after the interview, the detectives informed Jennifer of Dennis Bradford's arrest. She expressed gratitude to the detectives, especially Detective Tim Cromie and Agent Richard Renison, for their efforts and their promise not to drop the case. She also admitted that she looked forward to facing Dennis Bradford in court because he was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial. Jennifer was given the opportunity to choose a court date, and she chose August 10, the 20th anniversary of the attack. A turning point in the case came on May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, when Dennis hanged himself in his cell. Jennifer faced another challenge in her life due to the trauma Dennis caused. She almost lost the ability to conceive. Fortunately, Dr. Craig Witz, after hearing Jennifer's story, generously offered her his services for free twice in late 2012. As a happy ending, Jennifer and her husband eventually welcomed their daughter Jenna and then their son Jonah. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. His father was Cyrus, and his mother was Melina Spencer. Since childhood, Frank loved active games and sports, which helped him maintain a healthy body and mind. When he was in high school, he demonstrated his special ability on the wrestling team and was recognized as an excellent member. Frank had a strong ambition in business and wanted to continue the family business. So, after graduating from high school in 1984, he attended a local university and completed his course in 1988. After his father passed away, Frank became the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts. The year 1997 marked an important event in Frank's life. It was the year he met Maria. The two of them were attracted to each other at first sight. Maria was known for her hot temper and daring personality, which intrigued Frank. Frank's friend Paul remembered that Frank had always liked strong and wild people. And he was a bit like that too. When Frank and Maria met, they had a great start. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's parents, in particular, had mixed opinions about Frank. They believed that Frank was not the right man for their daughter. Furthermore, there were rumors that Frank's father had been involved in a gang and was even a hired criminal. Maria's father did not have a good impression of Frank. He even tried to prevent their marriage for a while. Frank's family was also not happy with Frank's choice. So, Frank and Maria decided to run away and rent a separate apartment to get away from their families. After a while, Frank's family and Maria's family were forced to accept their relationship. Family life gradually returned to normal. Maria and Frank got married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They then moved to a new house. During this time, Frank owned an auto parts business and sponsored race cars. He worked hard to provide his family with everything they needed. For Frank, his children were the top priority and driving force in his life. Maria initially tried to manage the housework and take care of the children. However, later, despite having a law degree, she became the coach of her daughter's soccer team. Her friends said that, unlike her husband, she was not really interested in the marriage. She seemed to be uninterested in work and family responsibilities. What worried her most was the financial issue. She liked to spend what Frank earned. Maria Spencer had a cold personality, especially towards the children. This caused many problems in her marriage. Her husband was frustrated with her selfishness and eccentricity and expected her to change when she became a mother. However, Maria remained her own person. In 2006, her husband decided to file for divorce because he could no longer stand her inappropriate behavior and constant scandals. He feared for the health of the children because of her unreasonable behavior. After the divorce, the relationship between the two became even more strained. A confrontation over custody was inevitable. Maria wanted to keep the children with her, but her husband did not trust her and believed that she could not take good care of them. However, not everyone agreed with her husband's views. For example, her husband's friend, Ron, believed that both parents were necessary for the children to develop normally. Frank's friend advised him to negotiate with Maria for custody of the children. However, Frank thought he knew better than his friends and continued to demand sole custody. Maria did the same. She also hoped to receive a substantial amount of child support. The conflict between Frank and Maria worsened over time. On several occasions, due to Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police for help. Maria repeatedly attacked Frank and the children, but not everyone believed this. In 2008, an incident occurred that confirmed Frank's accusations. After a fight with Maria near their children's school, Maria was arrested. The problem stemmed from Maria wanting to pick up her daughter. But Frank's relatives prevented her. The reason was that the two had made another agreement, but Maria changed her mind at the last minute. After the fight, Maria put the child in the car but forgot to fasten the seatbelt. When the police checked her car, they discovered that Maria's actions could endanger the life and health of the child. As a result, Maria got into trouble with the law. She was charged with disorderly conduct and child endangerment. In addition, Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, claiming that she had stalked him on multiple occasions. For this reason, Maria faced an additional charge. Maria could not be convicted of endangering the life of the child because the prosecution could not prove it. Therefore, the authorities decided to drop the charge in exchange for Maria's admission of guilt for disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria agreed and was fined $600. However, this event did not make Maria reconsider her behavior. Instead, she continued to act negatively. Frank's acquaintances and relatives increasingly heard complaints from him about Maria threatening and stalking him. Some of Maria's co-workers also said that she repeatedly mentioned that she hated Frank and was willing to harm him. For this reason, one of her co-workers nicknamed her Black Widow. Frank tried to stay calm and smooth over the rough edges, but Maria wouldn't stop. He kept trying to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. Frank started recording every conflict so that he would have evidence in case something bad happened. He just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria took it too far. In 2009, Frank tried to stay positive and eventually met a woman named Julie. However, Maria soon learned about his new relationship. According to Maria, she didn't care that Frank was dating Julie, but what bothered her was that Frank gave Julie access to the children. However, Frank thought that Maria was extremely jealous, and that was the cause of all the trouble. Maria then became very angry. In February 2009, she sent a voice message to Julie, warning her not to go near the children. However, the situation worsened when Maria's father was released from prison after serving 5 years for fraud. His reputation was already bad, and for Frank, this meant more trouble, as he knew Maria's father had a fierce temper. Many believe that Maria had inherited her fierce personality from her father. As Frank became pensive and anxious, his colleagues noticed it too. The first incident that happened after Maria's father Anthony was released was a robbery at Frank's office. Important documents that could affect Frank's divorce were stolen. The next day, Maria called Frank and hinted that she had found something interesting. Frank understood that she was referring to the stolen documents and advised her to return them. At the same time, he also reported the incident to the police. However, it was unsuccessful in proving that someone was involved in the incident. The detectives did not find any traces of the perpetrator. However, everyone suspected that Maria and her father were involved in the crime. The police also considered Maria a suspect. In the end, the investigation of the case was stopped. However, thanks to the intervention of the police, Maria returned the stolen documents to the owner. It is likely that these documents did not contain any important information that could be used in court. The situation between Frank and Maria continued to escalate. Frank's patience was at its limit after Maria repeatedly threatened him on social media. This was because Frank's children were still in contact with his new partner, Julie. Julie, on the other hand, remained calm and balanced, enjoying her time with Frank and his children. She tried not to interfere in Frank and Maria's complicated relationship. However, Frank was extremely angry that Maria had neglected her parental responsibilities. The arguments between the two continued until 2010. At that point, Frank sought the intervention of law enforcement. He asked the police to evaluate Maria's behavior. Despite the threats, Maria insisted that it was just her way of communicating and that she meant nothing reprehensible. Again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings were vague. In January 2010, a fire brought negativity to Frank. In a strange coincidence, before a romantic trip to the Caribbean islands that he had planned, a fire broke out at Frank's mother's house the night before the trip. Fortunately, no one was injured, but all the property was destroyed by fire and smoke. During this fire, witnesses reported seeing a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and friends, visiting the house at that time. Maria smiled and watched the fire before leaving. After the fire department put out the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found dead in the fire. Maria's actions crossed the line, forcing the police to investigate the incident. Unfortunately, there was no clear evidence of arson at the time, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria then sent Frank a frantic text message, gloating about how karma had caught up with him and how her life had been ruined. She hinted that Frank could face more consequences in the future. Maria also began sending similar messages to Julie, Frank's new partner. When the police failed to act, Maria's aggression escalated. She became so dangerous that she openly threatened Frank and Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. This time, the situation could have been much worse. Julie was home when the fire broke out, but she was lucky to escape by jumping off the porch. Although she was uninjured, her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. As a result, Frank invited Julie to move in with him. Frank and Julie feared that this would only make Maria angrier, but they had no other choice. The police are investigating the exact cause of the fire. A similar situation in the past suggests that the fire may have been intentionally set by an individual. Frank and Julie live in a different district than the burned street, so they hope that the police will conduct a fair and impartial investigation. However, once again, there is not much they can do due to the lack of concrete evidence. However, the investigators did not give up. Julie hired private investigators to join the investigation, which pushed the inquiry in a new direction. During the inspection, 2 flares were found on the lawn. One was broken and lying nearby. Investigators also discovered that the fire had spread from the steps leading to the balcony of the house. Finally, after collecting and examining the data, experts determined that the cause of the fire was arson. However, the lack of direct evidence has prevented authorities from identifying the perpetrators. The suspects remain at large and have not been prosecuted for their crimes. The cold summer of 2012 marked a tragic event in the life of the Frank family. In June 2012, Frank and Julie decided to split up, but in reality, it was just a plan to distract Maria. However, this also marked the final farewell of the Frank family. Just a few weeks later, Frank was found dead. On July 3rd, Joe, a close friend of Frank's, decided to visit him because he had not heard from him for a while. Joe and Frank used to take their children out together, and their team was currently in an important series of matches. However, when Frank did not answer the phone, Joe decided to visit him in person. When he arrived at Frank's house, Joe became worried when he saw that the front door was slightly ajar and there were stains near it. His fear was confirmed when he entered the house and saw Frank lying motionless on the floor. Frank's face was serene, as if he had finally found the peace he had been looking for. However, when Joe walked around the body, he saw dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, Joe called emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, everyone knew that this was a terrible crime. However, the detectives had to take matters into their own hands to find out who was behind this murder. Investigators discovered many important signs at the crime scene. They found large pools of blood and drag marks on the floor, along with a clear shoe print and bloody gloves in the kitchen. This physical evidence was sent for analysis. The investigation results showed that the bloody shoe print matched the size of the gloves that Maria's father, Anthony, often wore. Furthermore, Maria's DNA was found on the gloves. Since Maria had not lived with the family for over a year, the presence of her DNA on the gloves was unlikely to have happened by accident. All the evidence pointed to the involvement of Anthony and Maria in the case. Both were subsequently arrested. Autopsy results and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with two different weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper nest about 115 feet from the house. The bullet went through Frank's arm and chest, causing severe and fatal injuries. The attackers dragged Frank into the house, where they fired a final shot into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. Frank was already dead at that point. This action was considered an act of revenge, suggesting that the shooter harbored a grudge against the victim. Police speculated that Anthony shot Frank with the rifle. There were also some important clues left behind. Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, implicating Anthony and Maria. A review of traffic cameras showed Frank's car driving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. However, the driver could not be identified. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's house and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. Frank's dog was found 2 days after the crime when it wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Thanks to an electronic chip, attendees realized that the dog had an owner. The dog was later returned to Frank's mother. The fact that Frank had purchased the dog after the fire helped shed some light on the case. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the criminals had taken the dog as they were fleeing the scene. During the time Anthony was stopped, the dog was attracted to the smell of food nearby and escaped. It then wandered into a house where a wedding was being held, where it was found. This helped detectives prove that Anthony's phone was near the venue of the celebration on the day of the crime, even though he claimed to be at home in Harrisburg, 12 miles away. It is possible that Maria was the one who put the dog in the car, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Anthony admitted that Frank had asked him for help several times and that he had visited Frank the day before Frank died. This would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Anthony could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony sounded disingenuous. Anthony also confessed that Frank had given him the car to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints at the victim's house. This would indicate that he had been at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Anthony and Maria's homes to find the murder weapon, but Anthony was a seasoned criminal and knew how to handle weapons. Therefore, neither the rifle nor the pistol was found. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She assumed that the glove had been accidentally sent to her ex-husband's house, possibly because the children had moved it one day. Eventually, Anthony and Maria were released to go home. However, detectives continued to investigate and collect the evidence needed to solve the case. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed tried to talk to Maria at a school football game. During the conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This statement was strange and curious. The investigation into Frank's death received intense attention from the state attorney general. The Attorney General was furious with the indifference of the authorities to Frank's reports and statements. The police also faced numerous complaints of incompetence, and an internal investigation was inevitable. However, the police's negligence in their duties could not be proven. The reason was that much of the information provided by Frank, which the police believed lacked solid evidence, contributed to Frank's tragic death. The public and Frank's relatives were outraged that their petition had not yielded results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt not only in the crime but also in stalking and other crimes committed before. In 2013, a major interrogation was held. At the same time, Maria and Anthony continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors argued that the suspects had arrived at Frank's home together, but they chose not to use their own vehicles to avoid attracting attention. Instead, they fled the scene in Frank's car. By the end of 2014, Maria was recaptured. Meanwhile, Anthony successfully escaped. After being interrogated one last time, Anthony boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. According to the investigation, Anthony's escape was evidence that he was hiding his guilt. For 11 months, Anthony was on the run but was eventually captured in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After being arrested by local police, he fought extradition to the United States but was unsuccessful and was deported back to his home country. In the fall of 2015, Maria's trial began. She continued to deny her guilt and blamed her father. She claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, multiple witnesses came forward to shed light on her true nature, recounting the threats, stalking, and sabotage she had committed. After more than a week of trial, the jury returned a verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including murder, arson, burglary, perjury, conspiracy, and menacing. Maria was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years. Witnesses reported that she smiled throughout the trial. Years later, Anthony's trial began. Anthony was furious when he heard his daughter's accusations. He claimed he was only helping her but objected to the use of violence. However, the physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, the 77-year-old blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing at the judge. Years later, Anthony sought to appeal, claiming his defense attorney was ineffective, which led to his conviction. His daughter, Maria, also tried to appeal her case. However, both Maria and Anthony's efforts were unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kristen Trickle. Kristen Trickle was born on August 14, 1993, in a small town in southeastern Nebraska. However, her early childhood was marked by turmoil. Her biological mother abandoned the family when Kristen was just 3 years old. Despite the challenges, Kristen's father, James, raised her on his own, providing for her every need. Unfortunately, James struggled with a severe and worsening illness. Tragically, he passed away when Kristen was 16 years old. As a result, Kristen was at risk of being sent to a shelter until she turned 18, as there were no other close relatives to care for her. Fortunately, Kristen's aunt and uncle, who lived in Kansas, stepped in to provide a loving home. Although they already had 3 children of their own, they were willing to take in their orphaned niece and give her a comfortable and happy life. Kristen met Colby, a talented young musician, at church. At 18, Colby was already skilled on the guitar and wrote his own songs. He was passionate about building a successful music career. As they spent more time together, Kristen and Colby's friendship blossomed into a romance. Colby's charming personality and musical talents captivated Kristen, and he often wrote songs for her. He was outgoing, friendly, and had a way of making people feel at ease. After graduating from high school, Colby's interests shifted towards the military. He enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces at 18 and went on to serve for 3 years, establishing a solid military career during that time. Colby maintained a close relationship with Kristen, frequently calling and corresponding with her. At 21, he made a surprise decision to join the reserves, returned home, and proposed to Kristen, who happily accepted. They got married in April 2014. After their wedding, Colby and Kristen settled in Hays, Kansas, where Colby completed his college education and pursued a music career, albeit with limited success. He performed at local events and parties, playing cover versions of popular songs. They had 2 dogs, which they loved dearly, and many people considered their marriage to be happy. However, tragedy struck 5 years into their marriage. On Halloween Eve, October 31, 2019, at around 4 a.m., a distress call was made to emergency services. The caller, who identified himself as Colby Kristen, reported that his wife, Kristen, had shot herself in the head with a revolver that was kept in their home. When medical help and the police arrived at the scene, a young man opened the front door for the officers, but stayed outside himself. Inside, the team found Kristen, who appeared to be surprisingly calm despite the severity of the situation. When the officers entered the bedroom, they found a woman, Kristen, lying on the bed in a pool of her own blood. A large revolver was on her abdomen, and she had a visible gunshot wound on her chin. At first, it seemed like she had already died, but surprisingly, she moved her hand, and an officer detected a weak pulse and breathing. The officers moved Kristen to the adjacent room to position her on the floor for resuscitation attempts. Despite their efforts, Kristen had died by the time the ambulance arrived, and the medical team confirmed her death. Sergeant Brandon Hotman went outside to inform Colby, Kristen's husband, that she had passed away. Colby repeatedly asked if Hotman was sure, and when he was told the truth, he broke down in tears. However, his behavior and tears seemed insincere, given that just minutes earlier, he had been chatting casually with other patrolmen about video games. At first glance, the scene suggested that she had taken her own life, but experienced detectives quickly suspected that something was amiss. It was the eve of Halloween, and she had been preparing for the celebration, which made her apparent decision to end her life all the more puzzling. The detectives found handmade costume decorations on her vanity and themed treats in the kitchen, including lollipop bats and ghosts, gummy worms, and other sweets. This suggested that she had been looking forward to the holiday, which made her death even more unexpected. She was found nearly undressed, wearing only her underwear, which was unusual. Typically, women take care to present themselves in a way that they would want to be seen, even in death. Furthermore, the method of death, a gunshot to the head, was also uncharacteristic of a woman. This method is often avoided by women due to concerns about disfiguring themselves. Kristen's body was severely damaged. One of the most puzzling aspects of her death was the gun itself. The large revolver would have been difficult for Kristen to handle due to her small size and fragile nature. It would have been hard for her to hold the gun, let alone twist her arm to shoot herself in the chin. The position of the gun also raised questions for the officer, as it was lying on her stomach, pointing sideways. Kristen's husband later explained that after finding her, he too had considered taking his own life. He held the revolver to his temple but then changed his mind and called emergency services, hoping to save his wife. At the scene of the crime, detectives were surprised when the victim's phone, which was sitting on a nightstand, rang with an alarm. It turned out that she had set the alarm to remind herself of plans for the morning, but it seemed that she had changed her mind and taken her own life during the night. This unusual detail raised suspicions, and detectives thought that someone might have staged the scene to look like a suicide. As a result, the victim's husband, Colby, became the main suspect and was asked to come to the police station for questioning. He agreed to go willingly. When Colby arrived at the police station, he seemed upset but not overly distraught. He remained calm and confident as he explained what had happened the previous evening. According to Colby, his wife Kristen, a manager at Walmart who was expecting a promotion, had come home from work and they had played video games together. Then, he went to bed early because he wasn't feeling well. Kristen had gone to the kitchen to finish preparing holiday treats, leaving Colby to sleep. But in the middle of the night, a loud bang jolted Colby awake. The sudden noise left him dazed and disoriented, his ears ringing, and he couldn't see anything in the darkness. When he finally turned on the light, he was shocked to find his wife Kristen lying motionless beside him, her head bleeding severely. Strangely enough, if it's true as stated by Colby, he attempted to revive his wife, but soon realized it was hopeless. He then picked up a revolver, put it to his own head, but ultimately set it back down on her body. He called emergency services and went outside to wait for the police. This sequence of events raises several questions. For example, why did he place the gun on her abdomen instead of disposing of it elsewhere? It's also unclear why he waited outside for the police and medics if he thought his wife might still be alive. In situations like this, people usually try to save the person's life or apply pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. However, Colby did not attempt to help his wife again, claiming he was in shock. While a police officer was trying to provide first aid before the medics arrived, he did not show any interest in his wife's condition. Instead, he stood outside and casually chatted with a police officer about music and video games. When Colby learned of Kristen's death, he briefly teared up, but quickly composed himself. At the police station, he answered routine questions, including whether Kristen had life insurance, which he denied. However, he mentioned that he was eligible for minor payouts from his time in the armed forces. During the conversation, Colby began boasting about his military accomplishments, claiming to have worked in intelligence and participated in special operations worldwide. Despite sounding credible, Colby's claims were largely false. When asked why he thought Kristen might have taken her own life, he attributed it to her long history of depression, which stemmed from a traumatic childhood and adolescence. He cited her mother's betrayal, her father's death, and her forced relocation to live with an uncle and aunt she had never met before as contributing factors. Colby's words seemed convincing, but experienced investigators sensed he was lying and had possibly rehearsed his story. Despite their suspicions, they had no concrete evidence to charge him with a crime, so they had to release him. Kristen's family was shocked and devastated by her death. Her uncle, aunt, and siblings immediately traveled 500 miles to speak with the police and make funeral arrangements. They strongly believed that Kristen would never have taken her own life, citing her strong religious faith and regular church attendance. According to her family, Kristen was a happy and optimistic person who loved life and had big plans for the future. She had even been working on opening a shelter for homeless animals and had found a property she wanted to lease. Investigations confirmed that Kristen had been planning to rent a new property and was expecting a promotion at work, which she was proud of. She was also preparing for Halloween and had promised to visit her sister for her birthday in November. Her relatives stated that she had no history of depression or mental health issues and did not have any harmful habits. Her family also emphasized that Kristen would never abandon her dogs, which she loved dearly. They suspected that her husband, Colby, might have been involved in her disappearance. They described Colby as a controlling and cruel man who dictated whom Kristen could interact with and would become enraged if she didn't respond to his calls or messages immediately. He prohibited her from contacting her relatives, but she would secretly call them from her husband's home. Visits with her family were infrequent. During her last visit, she confided in them that she could no longer endure the mistreatment and had discussed it with her husband. She warned that if things didn't improve, they would have to separate. The autopsy of Kristen revealed a single bullet wound on her chin, which suggested that the shot was fired while she was on her back with the gun pressed to her head. While it was possible that she could have shot herself, it would have been very difficult to do so. There were no signs of struggle or resistance on her body. The detectives, however, were not convinced. Given Colby's history of controlling behavior, they suspected that he might have been violent towards Kristen in the past. They conducted a thorough examination of Kristen's body, looking for any signs of bruises, abrasions, or scratches that might indicate a history of abuse. Despite their efforts, no internal or external injuries were found, aside from the gunshot wound. The investigation then shifted its focus to Colby's personality, revealing that he was a habitual liar who frequently deceived others and even himself with convincing falsehoods. Colby's story didn't add up. Despite his claims of being in danger and having connections to intelligence, he had no history of being in high-risk situations or working with intelligence agencies. In fact, he had been dishonest with those around him about his music career and income. In reality, his wife Kristen was the primary breadwinner, working hard to support their family. Colby, on the other hand, only played occasional gigs during holidays and spent most of his time playing video games. He had talent, but lacked the persistence and patience to succeed, and his laziness held him back. The police investigation uncovered some information. A search of Colby and Kristen gadgets revealed a revealing look at their lives. Kristen's phone calendar was filled with appointments, from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent. Meanwhile, Colby's messages showed that he had been flirting with another woman, even while at the police station. He had exchanged messages on a laptop in the living room, raising suspicions about his honesty. A recovered search history also revealed that Colby had been researching life insurance payouts in the event of death shortly before the tragedy. This discovery raised more questions about Colby's motives and potential involvement in the events that unfolded. An investigation revealed that Colby had lied about his financial situation. He had taken out 2 insurance policies on his wife, naming himself as the beneficiary in the event of her death. These policies included military spouse insurance and a standard life insurance policy, with payouts that were much higher than Colby had initially claimed. In fact, he had calculated exactly how much he would receive if his wife died. Despite the suspicious circumstances and Colby's inconsistent statements, the case ultimately hinged on the forensic expert's report. The report concluded that there were no signs of violence on the body, except for a single gunshot wound, suggesting that Kristen may have taken her own life. The case was eventually closed, and Colby received the insurance payouts, nearly $50,000 from the military spouse insurance and over $100,000 from the life insurance policy. On the same day the money was deposited into his account, Colby ordered a life-sized realistic doll from an online store, apparently for intimate purposes. Colby indulged in a lavish lifestyle, buying a new gaming console, an electric guitar, and expensive musical equipment. He spent the rest of the money on fancy clothes and frequent nights out at bars and restaurants, feeling carefree and convinced that he had gotten away with the crime since there was no evidence against him. For nearly 2 years, Colby lived a life of luxury, but in the summer of 2021, a new district prosecutor took office and reopened the investigation into Colby's wife's disappearance. Detectives had approached the prosecutor, convinced that Colby had murdered his wife. They presented evidence, including the restored browser history, Colby's unusual behavior, and his clear motive. After reviewing the case, the prosecutor authorized the reopening of the investigation. In July 2021, Colby was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated homicide and intentionally misleading the investigation. During his arrest, he remained calm and immediately contacted his lawyers, who began working on his defense. Colby's defense team argued that his wife had suffered from chronic depression for many years and that her disappearance was inevitable. They also portrayed Colby as a loving and caring husband, a valorous serviceman, and a devout person, contradicting the detective's suspicions. The prosecution took a unique approach by hiring experienced specialists to create a psychological profile of the deceased and examine her emotional state leading up to the tragedy. This method, known as a psychological autopsy, involved analyzing data from Kristen's phone, social media posts, recent photos, and interviews with her relatives, friends, and colleagues. After months of gathering and analyzing information, the experts reached a clear conclusion: Kristen had no intention of ending her life, given her short-term and long-term plans. The trial and verdict in this complex case were delayed, starting in September 2023, nearly 4 years after the tragedy. Although the defendant had a clear motive, acted suspiciously, and lied during interrogations, the forensic expert's initial conclusion initially worked in his favor. The prosecution had obtained a new report that could potentially change the course of the case. When questioned about the insurance inquiries on his computer, Colby claimed that his wife had likely made them to find out the payout amount. However, the timing of the requests contradicted his statement, as his wife was at work at the time, confirmed by surveillance footage. Colby was also asked about a life-size doll he had purchased shortly after his wife's death, as well as other expensive items. He explained that he couldn't sleep alone and needed something to hold on to, and that he bought the console and guitar to take his mind off his grief. His mother backed up his claims, vigorously defending her son throughout the trial. The psychiatrist's crucial evaluation revealed that Kristen had not intentionally ended her own life. This detailed assessment was instrumental in determining the events surrounding her death. The autopsy report revealed an unusual aspect: the angle at which the bullet entered Kristen's chin was peculiar. The forensic analysis indicated that the bullet was fired from the left side of Kristen, contradicting her dominant right-handedness. This raises questions about whether someone standing on Kristen's left side pulled the trigger or if she shot herself with her left hand. The latter is less plausible considering Kristen was a right-handed individual. This vital evidence raises serious concerns about Colby's potential involvement in Kristen's death. After deliberating the case, the jury unanimously delivered a guilty verdict, finding Colby guilty of all charges. Consequently, Colby received a life imprisonment sentence, eligible for parole after a minimum of 50 years. Notably, Colby refused to accept his guilt, despite being given ample opportunity. Throughout his appeals process, all of his attempts to refute his sentence were ultimately unsuccessful. In the end, no modifications were ever made to Kristen's official cause of death report. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Stephen Freeman. Stephen Andrew Freeman was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up in a happy and healthy environment with no major issues with their parents or society. Stephen was known for being kind, responsive, and calm, which helped him make many friends. Stephen attended Spalding High School and later studied at Gordon State College in Griffin, Georgia. Mary Catherine Higdon, his future partner, came from a respectable family and was raised with a carefree and humorous spirit. She was creative and enjoyed putting on many plays for her family and neighbors. Stephen and Mary fell deeply in love during their senior year and remained inseparable. They shared many common interests, including a love for nature, hiking, fishing, and hunting. In 2012, Stephen updated his Facebook status to reflect his relationship with Mary, and the couple frequently posted photos together. Both families accepted each other's children, and after completing their education, the young couple moved in together. Stephen worked as a plumber, while Mary was a teacher's assistant and part-time salesperson. By summer 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years, but they had not yet gotten married. On August 1, 2018, at 10:42 p.m., Mary called emergency services in a state of panic. She reported that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend while handling a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that it was loaded. When paramedics and police arrived, Mary was in shock, kneeling beside Stephen's motionless body, crying and begging for help. She was eventually pulled away, allowing the officers to examine Stephen and provide first aid. Despite being shot in the chest, Stephen was still breathing and was rushed to Spalding Regional Hospital. Sadly, he died just before midnight. In shock and struggling to comprehend the tragedy, Mary visited the police station to give her account of the events. She claimed that the shot was accidental, explaining that there were always firearms in their home for self-defense, and that Stephen would often leave a pistol on the nightstand before sleep. On the fateful evening in question, Mary Catherine claimed she only intended to hand Stephen the pistol, but it accidentally discharged. She insisted she didn't know the gun was loaded and would never harm Stephen, the love of her life, intentionally. However, investigators discovered signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered everywhere. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story highly unlikely and decided to investigate further. They questioned Mary again, using pressure tactics to get to the truth. Eventually, Mary confessed to shooting Stephen in anger during an argument. She revealed that she wanted to leave him, and the argument escalated. The investigators recorded the conversation, but unfortunately, most of the recording was lost due to technical issues. Further investigation showed that the pistol couldn't have fired accidentally, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. Moreover, the bullet's trajectory indicated that the pistol was pointed directly at Stephen. The detectives also questioned Mary's behavior, suspecting she was overacting and exaggerating her distress. It was also revealed that Mary worked at a gun store where she received thorough training on handling firearms. This meant she knew how to safely handle the pistol, making the accidental discharge scenario unlikely. The investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Mary's statements, including a claim that she tossed the pistol to Stephen, causing it to discharge. This contradicted her initial statement that she was simply handing him the pistol when it fired. Mary's changing statements worked against her, suggesting she was lying and trying to conceal her guilt. She was detained and charged with multiple crimes, including felony murder and aggravated assault. During the trial, Lieutenant Wilson disputed Mary's claim of an accident, instead arguing that she had planned and executed the crime deliberately. A key piece of evidence was the presence of cooking grease on the pistol's slide, which Mary explained was due to her preparing dinner for Stephen that evening. Friends and relatives of the couple described their complicated and tumultuous relationship, marked by frequent arguments and instances of Mary threatening to harm Stephen or herself with a weapon. Despite the complexities of the case, the evidence ultimately pointed to Mary's guilt. Stephen and Mary Catherine had a tumultuous relationship, with many weapons present in their home. 2 days before the tragedy on July 30, 2018, they exchanged warm messages wishing each other a good day. However, the next day, Stephen told his mother he wouldn't return home to that devil and stayed at his friend Thomas's place. On August 1, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. She prepared dinner and waited for him, later learning he was at Thomas's place and going to pick him up. They encountered each other on the road, and Mary shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. However, the evening ended in tragedy instead of a reconciliatory dinner. The police initially believed the case was a premeditated act driven by Mary's anger, but her defense team revealed a different side to their relationship. At her trial on June 17, 2019, Mary Catherine Higdon refused a plea deal for life imprisonment, insisting she couldn't harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. Mary claimed the incident was an accident and that she loved Stephen. She also accused him of abusive behavior, stating that he hit her twice and forced himself on her on the day of the tragedy. Friends and relatives testified that Mary was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. On the night of the incident, Stephen refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared, which was the final straw for her. She couldn't hold back and fired at him. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including grease on the pistol and a sheet with bloodstains, showing that Stephen was not attacking Mary, but was sitting still on the bed when she shot him. In court, Mary finally gave a truthful testimony, describing Stephen as a harsh and controlling tyrant who had repeatedly hit, shaken, and threatened her. She confessed that he had constantly controlled and manipulated her, driving her to despair with unreasonable jealousy. The defense presented ample evidence to support her claims, including text messages that raised questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in the relationship. Stephen's message snippets suggested that he had insulted Mary Catherine and threatened her. However, what really sparked his anger was more disturbing. According to his friends, Stephen was furious with his girlfriend because he believed she had been unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine claimed that Stephen had assaulted her twice before, and she feared he would hurt her again on August 1, 2018. That's why she took action in self-defense. The defense presented an expert and close relatives of Mary who could testify to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, confirmed that she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting, though she regrets not taking a photo and initially believing Mary's explanation that the bruises were accidental. A tearful Mary Higdon told the jury that on the night of the incident, she decided to end things with Stephen once and for all, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became enraged, attacked her, and in self-defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand, accidentally firing it. After Mary Catherine gave emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense teams clashed with Stephen's former friends, who had been close to Mary for years, as they tried to portray their deceased friend in a positive light. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described Stephen as a loyal and hard-working country boy, while portraying Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. According to Thomas, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic over time, with Mary threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her. He also claimed that during an argument, Mary had once pointed a pistol at her head in front of Stephen. Another witness, Alicia Varela, who worked with Stephen, testified that Mary would obsessively call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, during her court testimony, Mary omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard highlighted. While Mary described their interactions and how their relationship had deteriorated into physical abuse, she never mentioned the moment when she claimed to have acted in self-defense and pulled the trigger. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard was skeptical of Mary's admission, pointing out that during cross-examination, Mary never mentioned being mistreated by Stephen. Lenhard repeatedly asked Mary if a woman who felt safe at home would confront her attacker late at night and bring him back home, but Mary's response was unconvincing. Lenhard then recreated the events of the accidental shooting as she believed they occurred. According to her version, Stephen came home, and after listening to Mary, they got into an argument because he refused to eat dinner. Enraged, Mary threw the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen tried to avoid further conflict by going to the bedroom and sitting on the bed, likely waiting for Mary to calm down. However, Mary was determined to confront him, calling out to him twice without getting a response. She then entered the bedroom and shot Stephen in the left side of his neck. Kate Lenhard pointed out the inconsistencies in Stephen Freeman's stories during police interrogations and court hearings, highlighting the contradictions in his accounts. Mary Catherine Higdon provided an emotional testimony about the alleged abuse she suffered at the hands of Stephen Freeman. However, before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard urged them to consider the possibility that Mary Higdon was not acting in self-defense, but rather was a mastermind of manipulation. The prosecution presented additional evidence and counter-arguments despite the lost confession recording. A forensic examination showed that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the time of the shooting, making it impossible for him to have been attacking Mary Higdon. Furthermore, while Mary claimed that the gun was always kept unloaded, detectives suspected that the pistol was actually loaded on the evening of August 1st, 2018, when Mary was preparing a rope for Stephen. Here's a clearer explanation. The presence of grease marks on the slide and inside the pistol led investigators to suspect that Mary Catherine might have loaded the pistol beforehand. However, those who knew Stephen Freeman, including colleagues, neighbors, family friends, and acquaintances, consistently described him as non-aggressive. Meanwhile, Mary Catherine changed her story at least 10 times during the investigation, which prosecutors attributed to fear. Mary Catherine rejected a plea deal because she was facing a potential death sentence. As the jury deliberated, they heard from all the witnesses and the accused. After just 10 minutes, the jury was ready to deliver their verdict, but 2 jurors had lingering doubts about the prosecution's case. These jurors felt that the investigators, in their eagerness to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated murder, had overlooked crucial facts. They were particularly concerned that the prosecution had failed to thoroughly investigate Stephen Freeman's phone, including his text messages and browsing history. Ultimately, the only significant evidence against Mary Catherine was her own lies, which weren't enough to prove her guilt. The jurors' arguments, particularly those of Victor and Chris, had a significant impact. After deliberating, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of not guilty, freeing Mary Catherine Higdon after a lengthy process. The 12 jurors reached the following conclusions. They found the defendant not guilty on the first charge of malicious action and the second charge of serious action. The judge subsequently acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon of all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime. The verdict shocked many in the courtroom, including Jennifer Freeman, who struggled to contain her anger towards the jurors. Those supporting Stephen's family were also stunned by the outcome. Following her acquittal, Mary Catherine returned home to Griffin to be with her family. Since then, she has maintained a low profile, avoiding social media to evade unwanted media and public attention. Mary Catherine's Instagram profile is private, and there is no information available about her current location. It is believed that she has moved on from her difficult past and is now living a quiet, private life. Stephen Freeman's mother paid tribute to her son on social media, remembering him as a kind and loving person. He lived a life full of love, joy, and friendship, and everyone who knew him considered him a friend. He especially cherished the relationships he made while hunting and fishing. Stephen had a special way of showing love and care to those around him. He made people feel seen and heard, often making them laugh until they cried. He was always smiling, hugging, and staying close to those he cared about. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tara Lynn Grant. Hi everyone. Today we're diving into the baffling case of a mother who disappeared from her home under mysterious circumstances. The police launched an exhaustive investigation, unearthing surprising and even bizarre clues. As they pieced together the truth, even seasoned detectives were left stunned. This case quickly became one of the most sensational in the country, with its shocking details leaving everyone outraged. Tara Grant was born on June 22, 1972, in Michigan. She grew up on a farm with her parents and sister, developing a deep love for the outdoors, horseback riding, and helping with the farm animals. In school, Tara was a sports enthusiast, participating in cheerleading, basketball, and the school band. After graduating, she attended the University of Michigan, where she met her future husband, Stephen. The couple started dating and soon tied the knot after her graduation. Tara, armed with a business degree, landed a job at a large international company. Stephen, who had ambitions in politics, initially worked as an assistant to a state senator during his university days. However, when the senator retired, Stephen found himself without a job and began working at his father's small tool-making shop. 4 years after their wedding, the couple welcomed a daughter, followed by a son a few years later. They then purchased a new home in a prestigious Macomb County, Michigan neighborhood just outside of Detroit. By this time, Tara had made substantial career progress, but it came at a cost. Her job required frequent travel, often to different states and countries, limiting her to weekend visits with her family. As a result, Stephen assumed most of the childcare responsibilities. His flexible schedule at his father's company allowed him to spend more time with the kids, but juggling work and childcare remained a challenge. To alleviate this, they decided to hire a full-time nanny. Through a special program, they found a young woman from Germany who would live with them and care for their children. Thanks to Tara's job, they could afford this arrangement, and the new nanny quickly bonded with their children, taking on most childcare duties. With his newfound free time, Stephen also started working part-time as a youth soccer coach. But despite their comfortable financial situation, Tara's constant absence put a strain on her relationship with Stephen. With her only being home on weekends, their arguments became more frequent. Tara held on to the hope that her next promotion would allow her to adjust her schedule and spend more quality time at home, but until then, she was constantly away on business trips. This uneasy routine continued until February 14, 2007, when an unexpected turn of events unfolded. On Valentine's Day, Stephen grew concerned and called the police, reporting that Tara had been out of touch for 5 days, a rarity. He recounted the events of February 9th, when Tara returned from a business trip, only to announce she had to leave a day early, leaving them with just 1 day together. The tension between them escalated into another argument, and Tara began packing her suitcase. Stephen overheard her making a hushed phone call, saying, "I'll be waiting at the end of the street," before she swiftly departed, getting into a dark-colored car. Since then, Tara had been unreachable, ignoring all of Stephen's calls. The police's first question was why Stephen had waited 5 days to report Tara's disappearance. But Stephen claimed he hadn't been initially concerned, thinking she'd simply left early for her business trip and was ignoring his calls due to their recent argument. However, as the days passed, he began to worry when she failed to contact the kids, aged 3 and 7, as she normally did when away. Then, on Monday, Tara's boss called to say she'd missed a meeting, which was highly unusual and suggested she hadn't gone to work at all. Stephen informed Tara's relatives about her disappearance, but they were skeptical, assuming she'd taken a break from him and their constant arguing. After all, Tara had confided in her parents about the strain her job was putting on their relationship and the frequent rows that had become a regular feature of their lives. Her relatives thought she'd soon return home, needing time and space from Stephen. As time passed, Tara's absence continued, and her silence persisted. Eventually, Stephen's concern turned to worry, and he contacted the police. During the police interrogation, the officers noticed several suspicious scratches on Stephen's body. When questioned about a possible physical altercation with his wife, Stephen attributed the marks to his frequent work with metal parts at his father's shop, citing regular scratches as an occupational hazard. Following the station interview, the detectives requested a search of the couple's home, which Stephen granted. Upon arrival, they found that all of Tara's belongings, including her personal documents and purse, were missing, along with her luggage. Stephen also provided access to Tara's computer, allowing the detectives to review her bank account activity. The lack of transactions since her disappearance seemed unusual, as one would expect some financial activity if she had indeed traveled, such as booking a flight or hotel. During the search of the house, detectives failed to uncover any clues that could explain Tara's disappearance. With no signs of a crime, they were left to retracing her steps since February 9th. The local police department, accustomed to handling minor disputes and nonviolent incidents in the area, was inexperienced in investigating such cases, given the region's reputation as one of the safest in the country. Stephen was outraged when asked to take a polygraph test, feeling accused by the police. He tearfully insisted he would never harm his wife. The police departed, considering their next moves, but Stephen surprisingly called them the following morning, ready to cooperate. However, just moments later, his lawyer intervened, advising against the interrogation. The police had no choice but to focus on Stephen as the prime suspect, being Tara's husband. Standard procedure aside, they had no other leads to pursue. Tara's relatives, friends, and colleagues all claimed to have had no contact with her since February 9th and were clueless about her whereabouts. Moreover, her bank account remained inactive, despite her likely need for financial transactions. Detectives shifted their focus to Stephen, and it didn't take long to uncover an important detail. His driver's license had been revoked, yet he continued to drive. They waited for him to get behind the wheel and then arrested him. However, Stephen still felt like he was being treated as a suspect and refused to cooperate with the police. His lawyer quickly secured his release, and Stephen returned home. The police persisted in their search for clues, obtaining Tara's mobile phone records in the process. They found that her last call was made on the day she vanished, when she called Stephen from the airport, saying she'd be home soon. After that, Stephen made numerous calls to her, but they all went to voicemail. The detectives listened to these recordings, in which Stephen repeatedly asked her to answer or call back, accusing her of neglecting their children. He also pleaded with her to come home for their sake. The phone itself was turned off, and according to the cell phone carrier's data, it last connected to cell towers near Tara's house on the evening of her disappearance. Notably, there were no incoming calls during that period. As we recall, Stephen revealed that Tara had received a call before leaving the house, with the caller stating she would wait for her on the street. However, upon reviewing Stephen's voicemail recordings, detectives sensed genuine concern for his wife's well-being, accompanied by anger towards her decision to leave their children behind. Despite this, they didn't clear him as a suspect just yet. The investigation stalled, yielding no new leads, as Stephen persisted in refusing police cooperation, accusing them of misallocating resources on him rather than focusing on finding Tara. Conversely, he actively courted the media, which began extensive coverage of the case from its early stages. Tara's enigmatic disappearance sparked widespread public interest, and Stephen became a constant presence in front of cameras, daily pleading for her safe return. As the case unfolded, the company that had facilitated the hiring of the nanny for Stephen and Tara took action, ultimately deciding to send her back to Germany. Prior to her departure, she provided a statement to the authorities, speaking highly of her experience in their household. She also revealed that on the evening Tara returned home, she had been out at a bar with friends. Upon her return, she encountered Stephen, who appeared distraught, informing her that Tara had just exited the house. Despite refusing to cooperate with the police, Stephen hired a former FBI agent as a private detective to investigate Tara's disappearance. However, this effort also yielded no results. With no leads, the police decided to take a different approach. They contacted the agency that helped Tara and Stephen find their nanny, and there they made an interesting discovery. Before hiring the nanny from Germany, the couple had employed 6 other nannies, none of whom stayed in the job for long. When detectives spoke to these former nannies, almost all described Stephen's behavior as not only strange, but also intimidating. According to their accounts, Stephen would rummage through their belongings, ask them inappropriate questions, and frequently yell at them, treating them like they were his subordinates. The police were puzzled by the stark contrast between these descriptions and the German nanny's glowing account of her time with the family. They obtained permission to monitor her emails and phone calls, which led to a surprising revelation. Detectives uncovered messages between the nanny and Stephen, revealing that they had been having an affair. It turned out that the 19-year-old nanny had been in a romantic relationship with Stephen during Tara's business trips, and this continued until she was forced to leave the country. Although the police considered Stephen's infidelity a significant lead, it did not directly link him to Tara's disappearance. Thus, they continued searching for additional evidence. During interviews with Tara's relatives and friends, detectives discovered that almost everyone had disliked Stephen since she married him. They described him as behaving strangely, trying to control her every move, and having poor relationships with her family members. The investigation further revealed that Stephen's former girlfriend, whom he dated before meeting Tara, contacted the police with some information. She disclosed that Stephen had reached out to her several months prior, and their conversations gradually became more intimate over time. Stephen eventually expressed his desire to start. He took on almost all parenting responsibilities and was a better mother than she was. When reporters asked about their financial situation and whether he had been living mostly on Tara's money, Stephen became angry and insisted he didn't need a penny from her. During the interview, Stephen made accusations of infidelity against Tara, but he failed to provide any evidence to support his claims. Throughout the conversation, he consistently denigrated Tara, emphasizing the difficulties he had faced in their marriage. Meanwhile, the detectives made significant progress in their investigation. Previously, they had been unable to obtain a search warrant for Tara's home due to lack of sufficient grounds, and Stephen had refused to grant them voluntary access. However, after the discovery of the blood-stained bag in the park, the judge finally granted the warrant. As the police arrived at the house, Stephen returned from the interview. Upon being informed of the search warrant, he unlocked the door for the detectives before contacting his lawyer. The lawyer asked the police if his client, Stephen, was under arrest, and they replied that he was not. Stephen then announced that he would take his dog for a walk, retrieved it from the house, and left the premises while the police conducted a search. As the police searched the house room by room, they eventually reached the garage, where one of the detectives spotted a large green container holding several plastic bags. Upon opening one of the bags, they discovered an unknown substance along with what appeared to be women's clothing. Opening another bag, the officer was horrified to find what likely were human remains. In total, the container held 5 bags, and the detectives quickly confirmed that they contained the remains of a woman. The police realized that they had found Tara's body and that Stephen was likely her killer. However, Stephen had not returned, so the police immediately launched a search for him, fearing he might flee or harm someone else, knowing that he would likely face prison time. Meanwhile, officers called in reinforcements to search the nearby park, as only a portion of Tara's remains were found in the garage. Over 100 officers from neighboring districts were dispatched to assist in the search. Their efforts quickly paid off, as they found another part of the body several hundred yards from where the bag was discovered, and later they found the head. Due to the cold temperatures, the remains were well preserved, allowing detectives to confirm that they belonged to Tara. As the search continued, the police found several more body parts, and when night fell, the search was suspended until morning. All this time, detectives were also trying to track down Stephen, but they were unsuccessful. They contacted his friends, and one of them came forward, saying Stephen had phoned him to let him know the police were searching his house and asking for a ride from the street. The friend drove to the location and picked Stephen up, taking him to his own home. During the drive, the friend noticed Stephen's strange behavior. He was terrified, his hands were trembling, and it seemed like he was on the edge of a nervous collapse. Once they arrived at the friend's house, Stephen asked to see his kids and requested to borrow the friend's car. At the time, Stephen's children were living in another state with his sister. The friend handed over his pickup truck, and Stephen took off. The police asked for information about Stephen's phone and credit cards, which enabled them to rapidly trace his journey. They found that Stephen had made several cash withdrawals on his way to the neighboring state and had phoned his sister, leading the police to conclude that he was heading towards his children. They immediately set off in that direction. Just then, An unexpected call came in from Germany. It was from the nanny with whom Stephen had previously been in a romantic relationship. She informed the police that Stephen had just called her, confessing to killing Tara. According to Stephen, the couple had an argument that evening, during which he yelled at her. Tara slapped him in the face, and in a fit of rage, he pushed her, causing her to fall and hit her head on the floor, resulting in her death. The police had no doubt about Stephen's involvement, but they still had to track him down. They searched the area along the highway to the neighboring state for several hours and eventually found the car belonging to Stephen's friend abandoned near the entrance to the national park. However, Stephen himself was nowhere to be found. The police then focused their search on the park, and several hours later, with the help of thermal cameras, they finally located him. He was lying under a tree, wearing only light clothing, and the officers realized he was on the verge of dying from hypothermia. In an altered state, Stephen was talking to trees and muttering incoherent phrases. The police quickly airlifted him to the hospital. Doctors managed to save his life. However, it took some time for Stephen to fully recover. While in the hospital, Stephen was charged with murder, and the detectives handed the case over to the court on the same day. Notably, his lawyer withdrew from defending him, citing that he needed to be able to look at himself in the mirror in the mornings when asked why. A new lawyer was assigned to Stephen, and meanwhile, forensic experts examined Tara's remains. A renowned pathologist who had worked on high-profile cases, such as the J.F. Kennedy and John Bennett Ramsey cases, was appointed as the chief medical examiner. After examining the remains, the pathologist concluded that Stephen's initial account of events did not align with reality. Stephen had claimed that Tara died from a head injury, but the actual cause of death was revealed to be strangulation. When Stephen regained consciousness, detectives visited him in the hospital, and he told them what truly happened that evening. He confessed that when Tara came home and announced she had to leave earlier, they got into an argument, and he started yelling at her. As she tried to leave the room, he grabbed her and Tara hit him in the face. Enraged, Stephen retaliated and then strangled her. Stephen dragged Tara's body from the second floor to the garage and put her in the trunk of her own car. At the same time, the nanny returned home, and Stephen lied to her, saying his wife had just left him. The next morning, he took the body to his father's workshop, making sure he was alone. There, he destroyed all of Tara's documents and personal belongings, and then dismembered her body using a saw. This gruesome task made him vomit twice, but he kept telling himself that if he didn't do it, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. After several hours, he packed the remains into plastic bags and put them in a container. He then returned home, leaving the body in the car for a few days. During this time, he was thinking of ways to get rid of the body without arousing suspicion. To create an alibi, he repeatedly called Tara's phone and left messages on her voicemail, pleading with her to come home. One day, Stephen took his children's snow sled to the park, where the bags containing human remains would later be discovered. He placed a container on the sled and pulled it up a hill, away from the crowded areas. However, the rope slipped out of his hands, and the sled rolled down the hill, causing the container to overturn and the bags to spill out. Stephen picked up the bags, put the container back on the sled, and eventually buried them under the snow in a remote area before returning home. Days later, when the police started searching for Tara, detectives announced they were launching a search operation in the park. Stephen became anxious, as he knew one of the bags, the largest one, was not hidden well and feared it would be found quickly. He went to the park, retrieved a few bags, and carried them to his father's workshop, leaving them on the roof. The day before his interview, Stephen took a container from his home to the workshop, retrieved some bags from it, and brought them back to his garage. The next day, the police obtained a search warrant for his house and found the bags in the container, which led to Stephen's confession. It turned out that Stephen had planned to take his own life rather than surrender, but he couldn't follow through with it. even after nearly freezing to death. During his conversation with the police, Stephen showed no remorse for his actions and would often smile and joke, even when discussing how he got rid of the body. While awaiting trial in prison, Stephen's children stayed with his sister. However, Tara's family was unhappy with this arrangement, and eventually, they managed to have the children moved to Tara's sister's care. Although Stephen's family still had visitation rights, Tara's relatives were relieved to have the children out of his sister's hands, especially given her continued sympathy for Stephen and her insensitive jokes about Tara's murder. The trial started in November 2007, and Stephen admitted his guilt from the outset. Despite this, his new lawyer attempted to secure a lighter sentence by highlighting the marital issues that had been plaguing Stephen and his wife for years, largely due to her frequent absences. However, evidence presented during the trial contradicted Stephen's claim that Tara had been planning to leave a day earlier. Her boss testified that she had no additional meetings scheduled and was expected to start work at her usual time. This was corroborated by Tara's sister, who had spoken with her shortly before the murder and was told that she would be home all weekend as usual. Furthermore, there was no credible evidence to suggest that Tara was having an affair. Her boss confirmed that their relationship was purely professional, and this was supported by their email exchanges and text messages. Even Stephen himself acknowledged that he had no basis for believing this. Ultimately, the prosecution was unable to prove that Stephen had planned the murder in advance. It appeared that he had committed the crime in a fit of rage, which could have led to a charge of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder. On December 21, 2007, a jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict against Stephen, and he received a minimum 50-year prison sentence. Despite his lawyer's efforts to appeal the verdict, it was unsuccessful. Stephen has since been serving his sentence in prison, but there is more to his story. The murder of Tara garnered widespread national attention, and Stephen seemed to revel in the notoriety. While incarcerated, he began writing a book and sought his sister's assistance to have it published. They even explored the possibility of adapting it into a film, with Stephen considering which renowned actor could portray him. In 2008, new information emerged. Stephen's children confided in their aunt, revealing that they had actually seen their father kill their mother on that fateful evening. They had come out of their room after hearing screams and witnessed the entire traumatic event. When this news broke in the media, Stephen's relatives accused the children of lying and continued to defend him. In the same year, it was also discovered that Stephen's father, who had not supported his son, was overcome with grief and guilt, and his body was found in his own home. To this day, Stephen remains in prison, and he will not be eligible for parole until 2058. Every year, Tara's relatives and friends organize a marathon along the route in the park where she used to jog regularly, and her children always participate. Despite their father's heinous actions, they have found the strength to move forward and honor their mother's memory. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Londano. When 31-year-old Jennifer Londano failed to arrive at work in Englewood, New Jersey, her family and friends grew worried. As a known hard worker, Jennifer managed the new Luna Lounge on Armory Street. She was last spotted in the early morning hours of June 25, 2017, as she closed the bar. Scheduled to return to work that evening to open the lounge, she never showed up. Colleagues waiting for her at the bar started calling her, but her phone was off, which only added to their concern because Jennifer had always been reachable and had never been late for work. Jennifer lived by herself, and her family grew concerned when she failed to return home, prompting them to file a missing persons report at the police station. Her loved ones emphasized that Jennifer always kept them updated on her whereabouts, but her unusual silence this time around sparked fears that something might have befallen her. When the police started their investigation, they went to Jennifer's apartment first. They found the front door locked with no signs of forced entry or damage. After gaining access, they didn't notice anything suspicious at first. The apartment didn't appear to be a crime scene, as everything was clean and organized. Nothing valuable seemed to have been disturbed or stolen. After finding no leads at Jennifer's apartment, the police proceeded to the establishment, the bar where she worked as a manager, to investigate. Upon interviewing the staff, they discovered that Jennifer had no conflicts with either the patrons or her co-workers. Everyone praised her highly, describing her as a kind, helpful, and hard-working person. Known for her sweet disposition, Jennifer was ambitious and wanted to make a name for herself, which led her to partner with 40-year-old Rafael Lolos in 2016 to open the Luna Lounge in Inglewood, New Jersey. Although Lolos provided the financial backing, Jennifer served as the manager. Jennifer's natural ability to connect with customers greatly contributed to the bar's success. The staff appreciated her warm personality, and her happiness was contagious. The police investigation revealed that Jennifer and Rafael were not only business partners, but also romantically involved and made no attempt to conceal their relationship. Despite their closeness, they had not yet decided to live together. On the morning Jennifer went missing, she closed the bar and got into Rafael's car, which was waiting for her after her shift. As he was the last person to see her, the detectives decided to question him. Rafael stated that he drove Jennifer home after closing the bar. He openly discussed their relationship with the officers, admitting that they had argued in the past, but claimed that everything was fine on that particular day. They went to her apartment together after he dropped her off from work, but he left later as Jennifer needed to rest before reopening the bar that evening. After Jennifer disappeared, he maintained contact with her family, and together they attempted to uncover her possible whereabouts. Although there was no reason to suspect the man's involvement in her disappearance, the police shifted their focus to pursuing other leads. As Jennifer's phone was turned off on the day she vanished, its location could not be traced. The last signal received from it was from a cell tower near her residence. The police also questioned neighbors, but none of them reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. The police reached out to the bank where Jennifer was a frequent customer. The bank's records of money movements can reveal the owner's whereabouts and fate. In this case, the police were in for a surprise when the bank shared the requested data. It emerged that Jennifer's bank card had been used even after her disappearance. The discovery sparked suspicions that she might be in hiding, but her family insisted she would never leave them without a trace. The police then launched a deeper investigation to uncover more details about the card's usage, including the time, location, and circumstances. 2 days after Jennifer's disappearance, a passerby spotted an unusual object in the water at Brooklyn's Pier 44 on June 27th. The man stared at it for a long time, struggling to identify it, until he realized with horror that it was a human body part, specifically from the waist down to the knees. The police were called, and the pier was quickly cordoned off. The discovery of a body part in the water was made under circumstances that are too disturbing to describe. It is unclear whether the part had been intentionally thrown into the water at that spot or had been carried there by the currents. Despite an entire day of searching, divers failed to find any other remains or evidence. The police faced a challenging task in identifying the victim. The discovery was sent for forensic examination, and upon closer inspection, a tattoo was found on the victim's right thigh. This could be a crucial clue. The police released an image of the tattoo, hoping that someone who recognized it would come forward with information. The tattoo inscription was in Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language known for its complex grammar. When police asked an expert to decipher it, they discovered that neither the tattoo owner nor the artist was familiar with Sanskrit. It appeared they had intended to write the name Liliana, but did so incorrectly due to their lack of understanding of the language. Just 4 days after the shocking discovery, the police received another distressing call. A passerby had spotted a foot on the riverbank near 79th Street. The area was sealed off by responding police officers, who then retrieved part of the leg from the knee down from the water. Even at this stage, investigators suspected that the two sets of remains were likely from the same body. The fingernails on the leg were painted pink. Divers searched the area of the river but were unsuccessful, failing to find any other body parts or evidence to aid the investigation that began after the initial discovery. Forensic examination soon confirmed that the fragments found were indeed parts of the same body. By this time, the victim's identity had already been discovered. A few days after the police released an image of the tattoo, a woman came forward, recognizing the tattoo as belonging to someone she knew. Jennifer's mother, Gladys Quintero, saw the picture on the news and immediately identified it as her daughter's. The tattoo was a tribute to Jennifer's late aunt, meaning Lily or Lillian. Gladys accompanied Jennifer's family to New York to identify the remains. They were devastated when it was confirmed that the body parts belonged to Jennifer. The investigation had now become a homicide case. Jennifer's family was shocked by her death, particularly the brutal manner in which she was killed. Although the exact cause of her death was impossible to determine, the police invested significant effort into finding other parts of her body, unfortunately without success. Meanwhile, as family and friends mourned Jennifer and paid their respects by leaving flowers at the bar where she worked, detectives worked to uncover who had used her credit card. They visited stores where the card was used and reviewed security footage, which ultimately led them to identify Raphael, Jennifer's partner, as the suspect. The investigation revealed that Raphael had left Jennifer's apartment on the day she went missing to go shopping. He bought a box of garbage bags and 2 meat cleavers using Jennifer's credit cards. Later that night, he drove across the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan with his cell phone records, placing him in an area along the Hudson River. Raphael never returned to Jennifer's apartment. 2 days later, the torso was discovered. The evidence pointed to a horrific possibility. Had Raphael killed Jennifer and used the meat cleavers to dismember her body? The thought was unbearable, but the evidence was damning. The police secured an arrest warrant and a search warrant for his residence, anticipating his capture. Fearing the detectives would soon track him down, Raphael rented a hotel room, paying in cash, and took up temporary residence there. However, this attempt to avoid detection proved futile, as his location was swiftly discovered, leading to his arrest. Raphael offered no resistance during the arrest and subsequently denied any involvement in Jennifer's death, claiming that she had voluntarily handed over the credit card to him. He further maintained that she was unharmed when he parted ways with her, but detectives gradually uncovered mounting evidence that contradicted his testimony, revealing it to be a blatant falsehood. A search of Raphael's home uncovered dark red stains in the bathroom, which were later confirmed by lab analysis to be Jennifer's dried blood. Detectives examining the couple's communication on a messaging platform found a pattern of frequent quarrels, mostly driven by jealousy. During the house search, a box from the post office and a bag containing a tracking device were discovered in one of the rooms, revealing that Raphael had secretly installed a GPS tracking device on Jennifer's car, enabling him to monitor her movements when they were apart. Analysis of cell tower data showed that after Raphael picked Jennifer up from work, they drove together to her apartment. Jennifer's phone was soon switched off, but Raphael's phone remained active, transmitting a signal to a cell tower in the Hudson River area between 9 p.m. and midnight that same day. This suggested that Jennifer may have already been killed, and the killer drove to the river to dispose of the body. Raphael and Londono had opened a bar together less than a year before she vanished, but their relationship was marked by frequent fights over money, which blurred the lines between their friendships, partnership, and romance. In their exchanged messages, Raphael labeled Jennifer a gold digger, and his tone vacillated between threats, apologies, and declarations of love. Jennifer's family was shocked that the man who had professed his love and participated in her search could become so consumed by jealousy that he would commit such a heinous crime. Raphael refused to explain himself, pleaded not guilty, and retained a lawyer. Although the police couldn't find the exact knives Raphael bought on the day Jennifer disappeared, they purchased the same type from the same store. Forensic analysis revealed that Jennifer's body had been mutilated with those knives. Raphael was charged with murder, desecration of human remains, stalking, hindering apprehension, and credit card fraud. The trial began in November 2019 and lasted 2 months. Prosecutors argued that Jennifer was killed in her apartment by Raphael following a jealous argument. According to the prosecutor, Raphael was obsessed with Jennifer and was devastated when he suspected she was cheating on him. Raphael's lawyers emphasized to the court that the state lacked evidence about Jennifer's actual cause of death. They pointed out that there were no signs of a struggle at her apartment and no marks in the bathtub where the dismemberment supposedly took place. The defense team argued that this proved Raphael's innocence, while the prosecution countered that it indicated evidence had been deliberately hidden. The prosecutor claimed that sometimes the absence of evidence is in itself evidence, specifically evidence that the perpetrator tried to erase traces of the crime. The prosecutor noted that Jennifer's bathtub was unusually clean, with no DNA evidence found, not even a single hair or skin particle. According to the prosecutor, an ordinary person's bathtub would not be that clean, implying that the crime scene had been thoroughly sanitized. During the trial, Jennifer's mother tearfully addressed the judge, saying, "You need to understand, this man has destroyed my life. Jennifer was my beloved daughter, the one I loved more than anyone else in the world. He has ruined me and my entire family." After reviewing the case file, the judge concluded that Raphael had an unhealthy obsession with Jennifer. When given the opportunity to speak or make a statement, Raphael refused to comment, instead only speaking with his lawyer. In December 2019, following 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Raphael guilty on all counts. The verdict was announced in February 2020. Raphael, 43, was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. He will have to serve 63 years before being eligible for parole, which is the maximum sentence possible, meaning he will be 106 years old before parole becomes an option. Tragically, the rest of Jennifer's body was never found or recovered. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Doreen Herbert. Doreen Herbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family with 5 children. Doreen was a kind and positive person who always sought to help others. Since her school years, she decided to pursue a career that would allow her to help people. After college, she moved to San Francisco and started working as a physiotherapist. Doreen also dreamed of creating her own big family. When she was 24 years old, she met a man named Michael Dennis, who worked at a factory near her clinic. The couple began dating, and a few months later, they decided to get married. In 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy together, but after the birth of their child, their relationship started to deteriorate. Within a year, they decided to divorce, and their son stayed with his mother, while Michael could regularly visit him. A year later, Doreen met a man named Charles. They began dating, got married, and decided to move to San Jose, settling in a quiet residential area. In 1979, their daughter Diana was born. Charles, like his wife, dreamed of having a big family. He raised her son and was overjoyed at the arrival of their daughter. However, a tragic incident occurred in the family in February 1980 when 4-year-old Paul climbed over the fence surrounding their pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, noticed it too late. She pulled her son out of the water and called for an ambulance. They took the child to the hospital and connected him to a life support machine, but after 10 days, the doctors concluded that there was no chance of survival. The decision was made to disconnect him from the machine. Doreen was broken, and she couldn't stop blaming herself, even though the police investigation showed it wasn't her fault. Nevertheless, the woman continued to live, and her little daughter helped her cope with this tragedy. 4 years after the tragic events, something good finally happened with the family. Doreen and Charles had been trying to have another child for a long time, but unfortunately, the pregnancies had been interrupted twice. Eventually, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything was going well. The couple was expecting the arrival of a boy, scheduled to be born in early November. Just a few days before Doreen was supposed to go to the hospital, the family decided to participate in Halloween activities. It was the evening of October 31st, and all the neighbors decorated their homes, handed out candies, and went trick-or-treating with their children in the neighborhood. Diana, who was 4 at the time, really wanted to join in, and her parents couldn't refuse. Despite Doreen being 9 months pregnant, she went trick-or-treating with her daughter, while Charles stayed home, handing out candies to other kids. The mother and daughter returned home shortly before 9 p.m. Charles informed his wife that they were running out of candies, and he planned to drive to the nearest store to refill their supplies because he didn't want to leave the neighborhood kids without treats. He left the house around 8:50 p.m. and returned approximately 15 minutes later. Approaching the house, he noticed that the front door was slightly open, which seemed unusual. However, what he encountered inside was a genuine nightmare. Upon entering, he discovered his wife Doreen lying on the corridor floor, surrounded by a substantial amount of blood. Doreen showed no signs of life, and Charles immediately called 911. Soon, he noticed that the body of their unborn child lay in the living room. The man was in a deep state of shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. At one point, the thought crossed his mind that Doreen might have had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized the situation was much more severe. Next to the child's body, he found a human hand, and Charles immediately understood it belonged to Doreen. Realizing that someone had attacked his family, he began searching for his daughter, fearing that something might have happened to her as well. There was so much blood on the floor that the man even slipped and fell while running through the house. Fortunately, the girl was alive. She was hiding behind the sofa in the living room. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics found a weak pulse in Doreen and rushed her to the hospital. Unfortunately, they couldn't save her, and she passed away in the ambulance. Her child also did not survive. Besides being removed from the woman's womb, the unknown assailant had inflicted numerous blows on the baby. Medical experts examined Doreen's body and concluded that she had been struck numerous times with a long, sharp object resembling a sword or machete. Meanwhile, the police investigated the house, which resembled a scene from a horrific horror movie. Later, several officers sought psychological help, as even they couldn't cope with what they had witnessed. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling. Investigators examined the entire house, but didn't find the perpetrator or any clues outside the house. Police saw bloody footprints on the sidewalk, which stopped in the middle of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had gotten into a car at that spot. Soon, officers discovered another clue on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They speculated that it might belong to the killer. As Charles stated, they never owned such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory, and police tried to talk to Diana, the girl who was the sole witness to what happened, and potentially could help identify the assailant. Diana told them that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. Doreen went to answer and saw a man in a wolf mask holding a long blade. He told her, "I'm going to kill you now." After that, the woman screamed at her daughter to run out of the house, and the girl hid behind the sofa. Diana couldn't recall what happened next until the moment when her father found her. She also couldn't help the police identify the attacker, as he was wearing a wolf mask. Initially, investigators considered the victim's husband, Charles, as a suspect. They found it suspicious that his trip to the store coincided with the arrival of the killer, as Doreen was attacked just minutes after her husband left home. When Charles returned, he stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he might have done this intentionally to have an excuse for the blood on his clothes. However, detectives quickly found several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes clearly didn't match those that left bloody footprints on the street. Secondly, the killer likely got into a car parked on the road in front of the house, but there were no blood traces found in Charles's vehicle or a different pair of shoes. Police went to the store Charles visited and spoke to the staff member, who confirmed that Charles did buy candies from him that evening, indicating he didn't have time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store also supported this alibi, so detectives temporarily stopped considering him the prime suspect. They asked Charles if he had anyone in mind who might wish harm to his family, and the men immediately pointed to Doreen's ex-husband, Michael. According to Charles, initially, Michael maintained a normal relationship with his ex-wife, but everything changed after the death of their son, who drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen, believing she deliberately killed the boy to cut all connections with him. He even filed a civil lawsuit against her, seeking to hold her responsible for the child's death, but lost the case. Even during the time when Michael and Doreen were still married, he occasionally behaved quite strangely. After the birth of their son, he often fell into depression, distancing himself from both his wife and child. Doreen believed all of this somehow connected to his childhood traumas. Michael had hearing problems from an early age, requiring him to constantly wear a bulky hearing aid. In those days, it was a rather large device, and because of it, other children constantly teased Michael. All of this led to the man growing up introverted, practically having no friends and avoiding interaction with women. Despite seemingly leaving these issues behind after meeting Doreen, Michael couldn't shake off his old problems completely. This became one of the main reasons for the couple's decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began harboring resentment and animosity towards her, especially disliking the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings intensified after Paul's death, and he started genuinely hating his ex-wife. Michael also lost his job, where he had spent most of his adult life, and this factor also had some negative effect on him. After hearing all of this, the detectives decided to go to the man's house and talk to him. Charles's account was clearly insufficient to make Michael the prime suspect, but since he lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house, they decided to pay him a visit right away. Officers arrived at his home around midnight and saw the pickup truck parked near the garage. They shined a flashlight inside and saw something resembling blood on the steering wheel and keys. Afterward, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered. The lights were on, and officers could hear water running inside the house, leading them to suspect that the man might be disposing of evidence or cleaning blood-stained clothes. So they continued knocking. Michael eventually opened the door. He remained calm, even after being informed about his ex-wife's murder. The man answered all their questions nonchalantly and allowed the officers inside without a warrant. According to him, he went to the store during the day, returned home, and hadn't left since. Michael even agreed to sign voluntary consent papers to allow a search of his house. As he reached for the pen to sign, investigators noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael claimed he accidentally cut himself earlier while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police doubted his words. The wound was visibly fresh, and blood was still oozing from it. Meanwhile, a few officers started searching his house. Michael went upstairs with one of them since they asked him to show his ID. When they entered his bedroom, Michael reached for the bed headboard, but the officer immediately told him to step aside. His actions seemed suspicious. Why would he keep his documents behind the bed? When the officer approached, he saw a holster hanging on the bed headboard with a loaded gun inside. He took the weapon and led Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, His colleagues discovered blood droplets on the floor, leading them to a washing machine in the garage and a pile of clothes with blood stains. This was sufficient for an arrest, and they took the man into custody. Afterward, detectives, along with forensic experts, scrutinized the house more thoroughly, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. The analysis of the blood would take a few days, and meanwhile, the police found some new gruesome discoveries. At first, they uncovered an empty box for a machete with an 18-inch blade. Medical experts confirmed that it perfectly matched the wounds on Doreen's body. Secondly, Michael had 2 makeshift coffins in his house, leading detectives to suspect they were intended for Doreen and her husband. Additionally, the police found body bags typically used by medical staff. Considering Michael had no association with these items, it raised significant suspicion. Putting all these pieces together, the police went to the judge to request a warrant for the suspect's arrest for an extended period. Without it, they could only detain him for a limited time. However, the judge deemed the evidence too circumstantial, and as a result, Michael had to be released, and the man walked free. Nevertheless, 3 days later, the detectives got the answer from the lab. Experts found 2 types of blood at the crime scene belonging to different individuals. Blood type analysis revealed that the majority of it shared the same blood type as Doreen, with a small amount matching Michael's. Apparently, the man injured himself during the attack on his ex-wife. This time, the judge promptly issued an arrest warrant, and Michael was officially charged with the murder of his ex-wife and her unborn child. They learned he owned the exact same wolf mask found near Doreen's house on the previous Halloween. He wore it to a party, and police even discovered a photo of Michael wearing the mask to eliminate any doubts. They found in his home the exact clothing he wore in that photo. But the story of the mask didn't end there. To further strengthen the case, police interviewed all of Doreen's neighbors about that evening. It turned out that children going door to door for candy saw an adult man wearing a wolf mask standing across the street from the victim's house, staring at it. Michael's trial began in July 1988, 4 years after the murder. Initially, he pleaded guilty, but later changed his plea. He didn't deny committing the murder, but claimed innocence due to mental health issues. A psychologist assigned to him concluded that he indeed had serious mental problems. Michael told the psychologist that witnessing other kids joyfully trick-or-treating on Halloween reminded him of Paul's death, triggering his breakdown. According to Michael, he went to Doreen's house with a machete on that evening. When she opened the door, he said, "You killed my son," and added that he intended to murder her. She immediately recognized him as the man behind the mask, screamed for her daughter to run, and in the next second, Michael attacked her. Michael insisted that he was unaware of Doreen's pregnancy, a claim that seemed hard to believe, as her friends insisted it was impossible not to notice her pregnancy before the tragedy. They even joked that because of her belly, Doreen had become broader than taller. The prosecution argued that the man was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance. During the investigation, detectives discovered he had told friends about his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband, then dispose of their bodies in the bay. Given that they found 2 body bags in his home, the prosecution suggested he intended to carry out this plan, but changed his mind for some reason. Perhaps he panicked or feared staying in the house too long, thinking he might get caught. Doreen's daughter Diana also testified at the trial. At that time, she was 9 years old and still vividly remembered what happened. Charles didn't want his daughter to go through such a traumatic experience, but she was the only witness. The trial spanned a year, and in the end, the man was found guilty of murdering Doreen and her child. Michael was sentenced to death, but while he awaited execution, California imposed a moratorium on the death penalty. As a result, Michael remains behind bars to this day, and his sentence is unlikely to be carried out anytime soon. Many years later, Diana revealed that this murder haunted her throughout her life, never allowing her to forget that horror for a moment. Eventually, she decided to forgive Michael and try to leave it all in the past, fearing she might lose her sanity otherwise. 40 years ago, an American teenager was found bludgeoned to death in a cemetery in New Jersey. Her face was so badly injured that it was impossible to identify her at the time. The American public began to refer to her as Princess Doe, the Jane Doe who had died too young. For 4 decades, her real name has been a mystery, until now. Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today's episode, I'm going to take you guys through the story of how Princess Doe was killed, how her identity was revealed, and how her killer was finally caught. Let's get right into it. Princess Doe was a previously unidentified American teenager from West Babylon, New York. She was found murdered in Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey, on the 15th of July, 1982. Her face had been bludgeoned beyond recognition. Her case gained national attention, and the public took a special interest in unraveling her story and finding answers. She became the first unidentified dead body to be entered into the National Crime Information Center. On the morning of Thursday, July 15, 1982, at around 8 a.m., gravedigger George Keyes discovered the body of a young girl in the rear section of the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey. The body was found lying on its back, just over a steep bank that leads to a creek below. The victim's face had been beaten beyond recognition with a yet-to-be-determined object. Due to the significant decomposition of her body, even her eye color could not be confirmed. The young girl was dressed in a red short-sleeved shirt. A peasant-style skirt was found lying on top of the victim's legs. No footwear or undergarments were found. No conclusive evidence was found, but this was difficult to determine because of how much the body was decayed. A golden cross necklace was found tangled in the victim's hair. 2 earrings were found in her left ear. Red nail polish was found on the right hand only, and she had no surgical scars, distinct birthmarks, or tattoos. Scars or marks on the head or face area could not be known due to the condition of the body. Forensic anthropologists determined that the victim was not pregnant and had never given birth, and was most likely between the ages of 18 and 14 years old at the time of her death. Toxicology did not reveal any traces of drugs, but was not entirely conclusive because of the time elapsed between the death and the discovery of the body. It is believed that the body was discovered after 2 to 3 days, or possibly even weeks, of exposure to the elements. This was especially difficult to determine because of the hot and humid weather in the area at that time. The forensic examination indicated that the girl had attempted to fight back or defend herself from her attacker, as injuries indicating trauma to her hands and arms were visible. The girl's body was buried in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery, not far from where she was discovered in January 1983. Donated funds were used to pay for the victim's coffin and headstone. The headstone was engraved with the text, "Princess Doe, missing from home, dead among strangers, remembered by all." For many years, Princess Doe was thought to be Diane Janice Guy, a missing teenager from San Jose, California, who vanished on July 30, 1979. This theory was propagated by several law enforcement officials in the state of New Jersey, who went as far as to hold a press conference identifying Diane Dye as Princess Doe. However, Lieutenant Eric Kranz, the Princess Doe case's original lead investigator, maintained that Diane Dye was not a viable candidate for Princess Doe's identity. Kranz's feelings were shared by Diane's family and investigators in California, who were particularly angered by the conduct of the New Jersey law enforcement. In 2003, Princess Doe's DNA was compared with a DNA sample from Diane's mother, Patricia, and it was conclusively determined that Princess Doe was not Diane Dye. After seeing images of the girl's clothing in the newspaper, a witness named Anne-Marie Latimer reported to officials that she remembered seeing a girl wearing the same clothing as Princess Doe purchasing cigarettes on July 13, 1982, just 2 days before her body was found. Latimer stated that she was shopping with her daughter at a supermarket across from the cemetery and observed and was able to describe the victim's clothing. The shirt and skirt themselves were traced to a manufacturer in the Midwestern United States, although the brand labels were missing. 3 people reported, after viewing the photos, that they had bought similar clothes at a Long Island store, which is now closed. On September 22, 1999, the body of Princess Doe was exhumed from the Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown so that DNA samples could be taken. The body was reburied in the same location. After a 2012 photo composite of the victim was released, it generated new tips, as it resembled several missing girls from across the country. One theory was submitted that Princess Doe may have been a runaway and could have been an individual using false names while employed at a hotel in Ocean City, Maryland. In 2012, a sample of her hair and a tooth were examined through isotope analysis and indicated that the victim was most likely born in the United States. At least 7 to 10 months in the Midwestern or Northeastern United States. The tooth sample indicated she could be from Arizona. It is also believed that the girl had spent a long time in Long Island, New York. Lieutenant Kranz, now retired, coined the name Princess Doe early in the investigations and also managed to get the case covered extensively in the media. The case was used as the impetus for recording unidentified crime victims in the MCIC database at the national level. Princess Doe became the first such case entered by the FBI director. After extensive print media coverage in 1982, Lieutenant Kranz, who was the original lead investigator from the Blairstown Police Department, was contacted by HBO regarding the Princess Doe case and asked if the channel could chronicle the case in an upcoming documentary entitled Missing. Kranz agreed, and the segment was filmed over several weeks. Kranz was shown following leads as they came in. The documentary featured actual footage of the recovery of Princess Doe's body, along with footage shot by HBO of Princess Doe's 1983 funeral. The case was also featured on America's Most Wanted in 2012 in hopes of generating new information about the case. The same year, the most recent reconstruction was broadcast on CNN. On July 15, 2012, a memorial service was held for the 30th anniversary of Princess Doe being discovered at the top of the ravine where her remains were found. Over 100 citizens attended, as well as several reporters and cameras. The victim's clothing as well as her photo reconstructions were on display for public viewing. On October 12, 2014, Princess Doe was honored at a missing persons rally in the area. In the years between the first discovery in the body and the final identification, several theories cropped up. The first one was that Princess Doe was actually Diane Dye, a young girl missing from California, which has now been definitively disproved. Secondly, the killer of Princess Doe was already imprisoned for another homicide. A man called John Reese was briefly suspected, as he was convicted of killing another woman in nearby Belvedere, New Jersey, but there was no real evidence of a connection with Princess Doe. The third theory was that Princess Doe was either a runaway that was known to work in the Ocean City, Maryland area, or a prostitute who worked at the local truck stop. The information for these two possibilities was highly inconclusive. Nobody from the local area came forward to identify Princess Doe, on or off the record. It seems unlikely that not one single person would come forward if she was known in the area. The fourth and disturbing theory was that Princess Doe was killed by a Blairstown police officer, and that is why the case was never solved. But this claim is completely unsubstantiated. There are retired local law enforcement officers who still follow and contribute to the case, even after 40 years. The fifth theory was that Princess Doe was a victim of a serial killer known to operate in the area, such as John Kleiss, Henry Lee Lucas, or Jill Rifkin. Though local law enforcement was aware of these claims, none were found to be credible. A sixth theory was that Princess Doe was an out-of-state teenager who worked at an area camp. Again, this was never proven. And now we come to the seventh theory, that Princess Doe was killed by a man named Arthur Kinlaw. For many years, this was the most current theory. Many of the facts fit the case, and this theory was explored on the America's Most Wanted website. Several New York Newsday articles referenced this theory that was published in 1999 and 2000. Mr. Kinlaw was already in prison for other crimes, but since Princess Doe's body wasn't identified, his involvement in her murder could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Princess Doe's body was re-exhumed in November 2020 using a grant, and she underwent DNA extraction for genetic genealogy. In May 2021, investigators were notified by the NCMEC, or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who were collaborating with Astria Forensics about obtaining DNA markers from degraded samples of Princess Doe's body using a grant. On June 18, 2021, investigators received the news that Astria Forensic agreed to extract DNA and construct a DNA profile. On February 10, 2022, Astria Forensics relayed to investigators that the creation of a DNA data file was successful. The results were sent to the NCMEC's consulting genealogist from Innovative Forensics Investigations. The managing officer was Jennifer Moore, who agreed to perform unlimited genealogy testing free of charge. On February 22, 2022, Innovative Forensics announced to investigators that they had found a candidate for Princess Doe. Investigators went to West Babylon, New York, where they met Robert Olenek Jr., Princess Doe's brother. They also collected a DNA sample from Princess Doe's sister, which mitotyping technology used to build a mitochondrial DNA profile. The Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory assisted by creating an STR-DNA profile through the victim's sister's DNA sample. Mitotyping technology sent their results to the Union County Prosecutor's Office Forensic Laboratory, then sent both the mitochondrial DNA and STR-DNA profiles to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. On April 29, 2022, the center identified Princess Doe as Dawn Olenek. Her identity was formally announced on July 15, 2022, the 40th anniversary of her discovery. Robert Olenek Jr. said that Olenek left their home at her mother's request, and she was never seen or heard from again. Way back in 1999, evidence came to light that Arthur and Donna Kinlaw may have been involved in Princess Doe's murder. Donna was arrested in California for attempting to commit welfare fraud by using the name Eliana, which was traced to a Long Island native. When the police questioned her, she gave them details about the murder of Linda, and her testimony put the Kinlaws behind bars. Donna gave details about 2 murders Arthur had committed, of 2 other female victims, who remain unidentified today. After Arthur was faced with a death sentence, Donna told authorities that Kinlaw had killed another woman, a sex worker, earlier in 1982. She told police that she was with Arthur in the cemetery and witnessed him commit the murder. Another report states that Donna Kinlaw said that in July 1982, her husband brought home a teenage girl, left home, and returned without her. He later apparently disposed of his clothing and cleaned his vehicle. Afterward, he threatened his wife, claiming if she did not attend her job, he would take her life, as he did to the girl he brought home. However, a lack of corroboration meant that Arthur Kinlaw was not charged. Lieutenant Stephen Spears, who worked on the case as a member of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office, from which he is now retired, stated that Kinlaw claimed responsibility for her death, but I have no physical evidence to confirm that, and without the identity of Princess Doe, I have no way of connecting the dots, so to speak, putting her in a place where he could have been or would have been at the same time. Spears also reported that he doubted the confession because the Kinlaws could not provide a name for Princess Doe, even though they claimed to have been with her for some time. Even though he questioned the credibility of their statements, Spears does not believe the victim was native to Long Island, New York. However, Donna Kinlaw was interviewed by a forensic artist who created a sketch of the girl she claimed to have met, which does resemble the most recent composite. Arthur Kinlaw remained incarcerated for 2 counts of second-degree murder. Following the 2022 investigation of Princess Doe as Dawn Olenek, Arthur Kinlaw was reconsidered as a suspect and later charged with Olenek's murder. Dawn Olenek was born on August 5, 1964. She had been a junior at Connequot High School in Bohemia, New York, where she had lived with her mother and sister, authorities said. But she soon moved out of the family home. According to her brother, she was thrown out of her home by her mom. She ended up getting killed in a cemetery, leaving no clue as to her real identity. But for more than 20 years, the name of her suspected killer was no secret. In 1999, the wife of Arthur Kinlaw, the convicted pimp who today is serving time for the murder of many other Long Island women, tied her husband not only to those deaths, but to the brutal slaying of the girl in the Blairstown Cemetery. In an interview with Newsday at the time, Donna Kinlaw recounted how her husband, in the summer of 1982, brought a girl of about 18 years old back to their Central Islip home. She told the newspaper as well as police that her husband left with the woman, but later returned home alone, appearing shaken. About 2 weeks later, according to Newsday, she read that police in Belvedere, New Jersey, had found the body of a dead girl who fit the description of the girl who was in their house that night. He kept saying, "What does it say? What does it say? Does it say who the person was who got killed?" She said her husband asked. From the story she read aloud to her husband, Donna Kinlaw told Newsday that she remembered that the New Jersey police named the dead girl Princess Jane Doe. Not long afterward, investigators exhumed her body to recover the murder victim's femur bone in hopes of using her DNA to identify her. And in fact, investigators acknowledged that Arthur Kinlaw confessed to the New Jersey murder in written statements dating back to 2005. But it was not until April of this year that Don Olenek was positively identified. Arthur Kinlaw, now 68, is currently imprisoned in Sullivan County, New York, on 2 other first-degree murder convictions from 2000. Among them was a teenager he knew only as Linda in April 1984 in the Bronx, Newsday reported. "I strangled her with my hands," said Kinlaw. "She was hit about the head, by me, with a bat." Arthur Kinlaw has now been charged with 1 count of homicide as the result of the subsequent investigation, witness statements, and his confession of Olenek's murder. It is believed that after Don Olenek refused his demands to go into prostitution, he drove her to New Jersey. They both ended up in Blairstown, where Kinlaw murdered her in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery. Neither Olenek nor Kinlaw had a connection with the town. Kinlaw remains imprisoned at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. Investigators are now looking to piece together Don Olenek's movements in the time leading up to her death. The DNA Doe Project, also DNA Doe Project Incorporated, or DDP, is an American nonprofit volunteer organization formed to identify unidentified deceased persons, or commonly known as John or Jane Doe, by using forensic genealogy. Their volunteers identified victims of automobile accidents, homicides, and unusual circumstances, such as persons who committed suicide under an alias. The group was founded in 2017 by Colleen Fitzpatrick and Margaret Press. Unraveling the mystery of Princess Doe has been a sensational success for genealogical DNA testing of exactly this kind. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest impact, and for the case of Princess Doe, that was exactly what happened. A molar root weighing just 200 kilograms would hold the answers that had eluded investigators for close to 40 years. With the help of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Princess Doe's molar and eyelash were submitted to Astria Forensics in 2021 for possible DNA extraction. What is so special about Astria is that they can extract DNA from samples that are degraded or otherwise would provide no value, said Carol Schweitzer, a forensic supervisor at NCMEC. "We knew that if anyone could get the information that was needed, Astria could. And they did." Kelly Kincaid, CEO of Astria Forensics, told NCMEC that they were lucky to find that the DNA was exceptionally well preserved and allowed for millions of pieces of information to be gathered to complete the DNA profile. This single DNA extract contained hundreds of millions of unique human DNA fragments, said Kelly. With these sequencing data, we were able to reconstruct her whole genome single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SMP, profile. This resulted in Astria being able to deliver genotype files to NCMEC and the Warren County Prosecutor's Office that could go on and be used to complete Princess Doe's genealogy. This technology, that would not have been possible 40 years ago, was just the break the investigators had been hoping for to identify Princess Doe's identity. Once Astria finished the sequencing, Innovative Forensic Investigations, or IFI, started to work on investigative genetic genealogy techniques to build a family tree that would ultimately lead to the true identity of Princess Doe, or who we now know as Don Olenek. This work was only possible because of the collaborative effort of each agency, said Jennifer Moore, CEO of IFI. Our team brings forward a diverse set of skills that allows us to help find answers to cases. Echoing Moore's sentiment in today's press conference, Prosecutor Pfeiffer reiterated that science and technology made the impossible possible in this case. Don's case was deeply personal for the investigators involved, and their push for answers and justice never wavered. Don's family expressed deep gratitude to everyone who worked to find answers in Don's case. "This is a very big deal for my family," said Don's cousin. "I'd like to thank Blairstown for treating my cousin like she was one of their own. It touches our family deeply. My cousin is always in my heart," he said while tapping the photo of Don pinned to his chest. "Blairstown gave it their all and never gave up. We were greatly appreciative of that." Since Princess Doe was the first unidentified persons case to be entered into NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, by the director of the FBI, William Webster, on June 30, 1983. This was a historic moment for missing and unidentified persons that has continued to play a crucial role in investigations since. The entry in NCIC has remained current and alive until today, when she will be removed. The tenacity of law enforcement has never stopped, and they continue to pour resources and new technology into solving this case. And it's thanks to the collaboration between police authorities and genealogical DNA testing experts that Princess Doe was publicly identified on the 40th anniversary of the discovery of her body as Dawn Olenek. So, what do you guys think about this 40-year-old case finally getting resolved? Do you still have any theories about Princess Doe? Let us know in the comments section.